head of the Tolerance and Non-discrimination Department. And I welcome you to Working Session 11, Tolerance and Non-discrimination, including prevention and responses to hate crimes in the OSCE area and combating racism, xenophobia, and discrimination, also focusing on intolerance and on religious grounds. I'd like to inform participants that the list is closed as we've reached the limit of 50 participants for interventions. The time will be 2 minutes for intervention, so please adjust your statements. May I also remind speakers that you can only take the floor in the capacity in which you are registered, and only entities registered on the speakers list can be represented. We kindly ask participants to submit their statements before the session to the interpreters. They will not be distributed to participants without your consent, and preferably to distribution to ensure that flow of documents reflect the discussion. The statement should be provided to the documentation desk in front of the plenary hall. For the coming sessions, we would remind participants that the speakers list is open 1 hour before the session starts, and participants are advised to arrive early, as when we reach the limit of 50 participants, the list is closed. Please note that only participants present with their badge can sign up to the list of speakers. Before we begin, I would also like to kindly remind everyone that the evening of this Wednesday, we will have an event at the Poland Museum on anti-Semitism and responses, educational responses. We urge everybody to sign up at the welcome desk and take part in this exciting event. I'd like to turn now to our first introducer, Ambassador Andrzej Lindarza. Ambassador Lindarza entered the German Foreign Service in 1990. She held posts in Moscow, London, and Helsinki, and worked as deputy spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry, head of division for the Western Balkans, special envoy for Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia, and federal government commissioner for disarmament and arms control. In February of 2015, she was nominated as the head of the task force for the 2016 OSCE chairmanship. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Many thanks. If I may, I will continue in German, so you can take your devices if necessary. Exzellenzen, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, das Thema dieser Sitzung Toleranz und Nichtdiskriminierung ist.
Ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this session of tolerance and non-discrimination is an important issue for the OSCE. That is why Mr. Scheiner, in his opening speech to the HDIAM, explicitly underlined that the subject is one of the main challenges of our open societies. In this context, I would like to thank Mr. Andrew Baker, who was responsible for the unit on anti-Semitism, and Professor Bullen-Schenner. I would also like to thank them for being here at this session. Thank you for your encouragement. And we are going to be very interested to hear your interventions. The stakeholders in the OSCE perceive themselves as to be pluralist and open societies, and this is corroborated by the commitments that we've subscribed to. For example, the Copenhagen document on pluralistic societies. We were and remain certain that democratic forms are the best way of respecting people's fundamental rights. So there is a number of documents of the OSCE, the Paris Charter, the Copenhagen document, everything covered in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are things which we've picked up on and underlined reciprocally. Respect for human rights, in particular, tolerance and non-discrimination, is the duty of all members of society. and of a society that views itself able to develop respect for other cultures and religions, is the basis for peaceful coexistence in diversity in our countries. Every citizen has the right to live as they wish, so long as they respect the lives of others. Discrimination, hate speech are a direct threat for people, but also for peace in a society. Combating intolerance and discrimination is a political objective and has been so since the beginning of the OSCE, and it is relevant today too. It's an issue of combating all forms of discrimination, whether it's on the basis of ethnicity, religion, culture, gender, sex, or others, and unlimited respect for human dignity. As the German chairmanship, we have organized the first of 3 meetings devoted to the human dimension. We did this in April. We have outlined a strategy for combating intolerance and discrimination. For various weeks in Berlin, we talked about various activities to combat intolerance against Roma and Sinti people. Tolerance needs to be strengthened. For us, this is very important to the extent that Mr. Steinberger, the chairperson in office of the OSCE, has organized a conference or a summit to be held in Berlin on the 20th of October, and he invites you to this, including members of civil society. We will be dealing with 2 subjects at this conference. Firstly, the issue of education and tolerance, working on education, awareness raising, and acceptance of diversity, individual freedom, cultural diversity. All of this plays a key role in the fight against racism, xenophobia, and intolerance. This educational work is to be undertaken across society, in the educational sector as well, and through leisure, and also in the workplace and the media. It is media, in particular new media, social networks, who play a key role and have impact both positive and negative. Here, it is a question of promoting tolerance, but also of promoting hate speech. So the second subject on this conference will be best practices on how to counteract hatred and discrimination. Civil society, which plays an essential role in the promotion of tolerance and diversity, will have the opportunity to speak at a pre-conference on the 19th of October, which will be followed by contributions to the main conference. We hope that we'll be able to see you at the conference, and we are looking forward to hearing your interventions at the conference in Berlin. Finally, one important thing for us as the country of the chairmanship is the ministerial conference in Hamburg. The HDIM's conclusions and the conference should influence our preparation for this ministerial conference and the preparation for the Hamburg meeting. We would like to place front and center of the debate the fight against racism. This year, all of the regions of the OSCE and others are ever more concerned by the phenomenon of racism. Everyone should be concerned by this. We believe that the negotiations on cooperation between various member states may be able to count on a very strong political signal too in the Hamburg conference. Once again, I am very pleased to be here for the discussions and debates that we will have this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I turn now to our next introducer, Mr. Matthew Collins. Matthew Collins is the author of Hate, My Life in the British Far Right, and an activist for the NGO Hope Not Hate. Matthew is a former National Front and British National Party member who first joined the right-wing movement at the age of 14 and grew through its ranks, including participation in racist violence and political activities. Having parted with right-wing ideology, He's now a member of the investigative team for an NGO that campaigns to counter racism and fascism, and to combine research into right-wing in the UK with community organizing and grassroots actions to defeat hate groups at elections and to build community resilience against extremism. Mr. Collins, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and apologies to the people in the boxes who have to translate what I'm about to say. First of all, the good news, FIFA have declared racism over. They've disbanded their anti-racist task force, saying that their mission has been completely fulfilled. Every time I go and speak somewhere, oh, there's a little thing, look. Can you see that? Oh, there's my presentation. There's my book. You can get it on Amazon. It's the only place one won't be signed in advance. Everywhere my colleagues and I go across Europe and indeed the world, people are under the impression that the extreme far right in the United Kingdom are growing, they are enormous, and they are influential. The reality of that is that we have the smallest far right in the United Kingdom for over 30 years. It is finished. Electorally, it has no influence, it has no electoral opportunity. Its numbers are lower than any period in the last 30 years, and yet people are under the impression that the extreme far right in the United Kingdom must be absolutely enormous. In fact, in Hungary last year, I attended a conference where an English academic spoke about how Britain First, a small far-right group in the United Kingdom, had 2 MPs. I don't know how much an academic gets paid, but I wouldn't mind swapping salaries. In 2014, one of the better newspapers in Great Britain ran a headline on its inside pages. An academic from the Midlands had been tasked with investigating the far right in the United Kingdom. And he went away and researched it on the internet, and he came back with this spectacular headline which said that the far right has invaded the internet. Now, as my book, available on Amazon, will tell you, I have experience in the far right, and so the newspaper came to me for a quote. Is it true that the far right has invaded the internet? And I was rather flippant, as I have a reputation for being, and my response was, could you imagine if he was tasked with investigating the rise of breasts on the internet? Did you get that, number 4? What we do have, which I think confuses people in the United Kingdom, is unfortunately a mainstream media which progressively has falling in line with something on social media, which is basically you can say whatever you want, whenever you want, about whoever you want, without any recourse. And what we're seeing is people who are struggling to comprehend some of the things that they see on social media, and indeed some of the things that they see in society, and they become automatically assured that you can solely put down the rise of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and racism in the UK down to an organised far right. But the far right, as I've said previously, in the UK is close to collapse. But what it isn't, of course, is finished. And what we don't do in Hope Not Hate, where we investigate the extreme far right, we go to their meetings, we go to their marches, we try and have a deep, penetrative look inside them, is we don't believe you can judge the dangers of the extreme far right on its size. And certainly, we cannot judge the dangers of the extreme far right on its electoral capabilities. We've had an organised far right in the United Kingdom, and I mean properly organised electorally, since about 1967. And during that whole time, they've had a handful of councillors, and in 2009, just 2 MEPs. And yet still people persist with this idea that the far right is rising. But as I said earlier, Islamophobia, racism, anti-Semitism aren't the domain of the extreme far right. They have become, particularly I think in the United Kingdom, mainstream. That newspapers have become obsessed with questions about identity, with questions about immigration. These are, of course, legitimate questions. If you're English like me, one of the first struggling questions you have the minute you get out of bed in the morning is actually, what is English culture? Our national meal is an Indian curry, our dessert is a Turkish kebab, and we normally begin and finish the night by drinking Belgian lager. But it's become a national obsession. And one of the very, very small far-right groups in the UK is a group called Britain First, which has only 200 to 300 members. But it is the largest political party on social media anywhere in the world. It's almost approaching 2 million followers. Now, I don't have the time to go into how it manages to do that, but social media is very easily corrupted, as are young people. And often at our offices, we receive horrified phone calls from individuals who go onto these Facebook pages and ring us or email us and ask us, what can we do about this horrific story, these lies, all these kind of things that they've read on social media that they assume some tiny little Nazi in a bedsit has written. And actually, as often we have to tell people, that is actually not an article written by a Nazi, that is an article written by a journalist for the Daily Express or the Daily Star newspapers. And some of my favourite headlines that we currently have to contend with in the United Kingdom, Muslim schools ban our culture, is one. And as an Englishman, that's very interesting because I was very interested in what is English culture. According to the Daily Express newspaper, English culture, we're an old country, we've been around a lot longer than some of you, we even had colour television before some of you. According to the Daily Express newspaper, English culture is Shakespeare, Harry Potter, cricket, which of course, if you're aware of the Indian subcontinent, is the #1 sport in Pakistan, music, Muslims don't like music, Ludo, I've never even heard of that game, Monopoly, and chess. These are all forbidden by Muslims apparently, and they're also exactly what is English culture. Muslim-only public loos. The BBC puts Muslims before you. Sniffer dogs offend Muslims. None of these stories are actually accurate. None of these stories are actually true, but people only seem to be offended by them when they can attribute them to the extreme far right. These are now mainstream articles. The decline in the British far right is put down to a number of things. I think first and foremost, we have to accept that some of their more palatable rhetoric has gone from the margins, the very, very margins, and made it into the mainstream. The British far right declined in 2010, and some of the things they were saying on the doorsteps in 2009 are now actually the very same things that mainstream political parties are saying on doorsteps in 2016. They have become irrelevant. Some people will survive and continue because they are hardened. They're hardened believers in Jewish conspiracy theories. They're hardened racists. They have hardened views about Muslims. But generally, people pass through far-right organizations because at a time, it appears to them, or it would seem to them, that these parties represent them. And very, very slowly, these views have now become mainstream, and the extreme far right in the United Kingdom is small and it's fractured. And we judge the far right, unlike many other organizations, of course, on how many people are engaging in them offline. But what we don't do is, of course, is rate the far right, how dangerous it is on its electoral capabilities. You're all very aware, I'm sure, that earlier this year, a member of our parliament, a member of our Labour Party, was murdered by an alleged far-right extremist outside her constituency office. You'll also be aware that many people in the United Kingdom were horrified by that, but also there were some people in society who thought that she deserved it. A very, very small minority, but these are the people, of course, from which early last year we had a Sikh man attacked in a supermarket because somebody thought he was Muslim. So we have an ongoing problem, an ongoing crisis almost. But also one of the things we have to be clear about is that people who are committing racist attacks don't have to be members of the extreme far right. We have a rise of Islamophobia in the United Kingdom. I'd say a rise, but it's been ongoing and ongoing. A research document by Cardiff University said up until 2008, Muslims in the United Kingdom were viewed as a terrorist threat, and that was post 9/11. And then from 2009 onwards, Muslims have been perceived as a cultural threat. And we are struggling often to understand culturally exactly what it is that we do. Many people are also, I'm sure, probably unaware that we have a rise of anti-Semitism in the UK. And the rise in anti-Semitism doesn't come from its usual suspects. I think it would be fair to say that in some regards, in respect to the rise of Islamophobia, there are sections on the extreme left who have responded with anti-Semitism. And in fact, at the Labour Party conference yesterday, leaflets were put out at that conference asking that the Jewish labour movement, which has been part of the Labour Party in the United Kingdom since the 1920s, be expelled from the Labour Party. And in an age where politically everyone pushed to the centre for a very, very long time with a simple message, it would seem that the extremists have upped their ante on the sidelines, again, with very, very simple explanations and very, very simple politics for what are often complex questions. I am coming to the end. You'll be grateful, number 4. One of the questions that we was asked to tackle was about what can member states do to tackle the rise of hate crime? What can they do to combat hate crime? And I'm not entirely sure what you can do. I'm assuming it's illegal in every state. We're very, very fortunate in the United Kingdom that there's an extra tariff often added on to people that are convicted for hate crimes. But people will hate always. People will act out on hate always. People will commit acts of violence always. And that's one of the unfortunate things. We can have education, we can have people warned, we can have people shown the benefits of changing, advancing multicultural, multiracial societies, but people will always kick back against that. There will always be people who will fall through the cracks. There will always be people who suffer. I was one of them. The book is available on Amazon. You won't get any answers from it. It's quite rude, actually. But there will always be people. So what I would say, in terms of leaving that question to probably better qualified people, one of the things that is also very important is how we treat the victims of hate crime. Often the victims of hate crime complain that they feel that they have become a nuisance. Often they feel that they aren't listened to. Often they feel they aren't supported. As well as tackling hate crime, and if ever possible, tackling people that commit hate crime, we have to look at the way that we treat the victims of hate crime. One of the things that we have, of course, post-Brexit, where people in our country voted to leave the European Union, and it's extraordinary because if you fly into the UK, there's lots of English people queuing up at the bit that says non-EU passports. One of the things that we've experienced post-Brexit is an increase in the reporting of hate crime, is the increase of attacks on individuals. And these attacks no longer seem to be taking the form of attacks against people of colour or people who are Jewish or people who are Muslim or black. We've had extraordinary incidents, sad and disgraceful incidents, where Polish people have been attacked. And a Polish gentleman was killed recently. He was set upon by a group of kids. And the first thing that we do when we answer the telephone is people assume it was some neo-Nazi hit squad, and it wasn't. It was just those sort of lazy minds acting out their prejudices, the sort that we see in the very newspapers that we have. So we must be very, very firm on these things. I didn't have the answer to the question about how can we stop hate crime. I think it's always going to happen as long as we have a society. I mean, one of the things about social media is, and we saw it in the UK during Brexit, was this idea that everybody's view is valid, and to a degree it is. But it tends to be, particularly on social media, shouting down the intelligent, shouting down the reasonable, because the angry and the haters and the conspiracy theorists, their views have become equally as important as everybody else. And that is one of the things that we must tackle. In the UK, we have a tiny, tiny far right that's almost irrelevant except for its potential for creating havoc and mayhem. But the overall picture is one that is concerning, that some of the things that were on the margins of society, the racism, the Islamophobia, and the anti-Semitism, have become mainstream. We have to tackle these messages. We have to work hard on social media. And also, I think, as I said before, we really have to look at how we treat the victims of hate crime as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you also for emphasizing the importance of government response to victims of hate crime. I turn now to our next speaker, Rabbi Andrew Baker. Rabbi Baker is the Director of International Jewish Affairs at the American Jewish Committee, which he joined in 1979. He is also the personal representative of the OSCE Chairperson in Office on Combating Anti-Semitism, a position he has held since 2009. Rabbi Baker is a leading expert on anti-Semitism in Europe. He travels extensively to strengthen relationships between AJC and Jewish communities worldwide. Throughout most of the 1990s, as Director of European Affairs, Rabbi Baker promoted tolerance in the emerging democracies of Central and Eastern Europe. He's active in Holocaust restitution issues, and in 2003 was awarded the Officer's Cross of the Order of Merit by Germany for his work in German-Jewish relations. Rabbi Baker, the floor is yours.
Christina, thank you for the introduction. Thank you, of course, for the important work you're doing at ODIHR. Again, I want to thank the German chairmanship for affording me this opportunity to serve as its personal representative. What I wanted to do in the brief time I have this afternoon is to share some reflections based on a number of country visits that I've had the occasion to make, a number of them with my colleague, Professor Bulent Shinai, and it's been, I think, a very positive experience that we've made a number of these visits together. But in reflecting on this, I think they suggest some larger themes and developments not limited to these few countries. In the spring of 2013, we placed a great deal of focus with a expert conference that took place that spring in Berlin on the state of Jewish community security. Clearly, a significant number of communities were feeling vulnerable, and really at that time, I think there were not many governments that were stepping forward, or governments that truly recognized the severity of the problem. I think now we can say that effectively that's changed, and we're seeing more and more governments, largely as a result of recent lethal attacks, but more and more governments recognizing this important need. So we see funds being made available to individual communities to beef up security, in some cases through direct grants, in some cases through funds made available to vulnerable religious communities. We see more and more now the positioning of armed police in front of synagogues and community buildings at critical times, where we might have seen difficulty in positioning security cameras. Now we see more of that happening. I can say that on recent visits to London, to Stockholm, to Malmö, and to Oslo, in all cases, Jewish community leaders expressed their satisfaction with the way governments have been responding. That noted, I would still add there are a couple of problems we witness. In Sweden, we find that police have come to say they have positioned themselves in front of these buildings and believe they are now potential targets, and some have literally walked off the job because of that. In France, we saw after the terrible attacks there on the kosher supermarket, a ramping up of security, the military being employed in front of virtually every Jewish school and community building. But of course, in light of the more recent attacks, first in Paris, more recently in Nice, it's quite evident to everyone that all of the population is in various ways threatened. So that immediate direct security is being reduced. It can be pointed out that anti-Semitic incidents and attacks have been recorded in lower numbers this past year. But with now the reduction of security, it remains to be seen whether those numbers might increase again. In Malmö, one city administrator responsible for security for the city voiced his own frustration in having full information shared with him by the city, by the government's own police and security services. It points to some of the difficulty in coordination that is so important when it comes to dealing with these new extremist threats. I've also stressed in previous presentations the importance of knowing the sources of anti-Semitism if governments, if other actors are going to be successful in coming up with the proper measures, immediate, direct, and long-term educational measures to deal with these problems. We know the difficulties in hate crime recording, even in disaggregating data on anti-Semitic incidents. Far more difficult is it to try to get a picture of perpetrators in this data. But there have been some important initiatives that should be cited here too. In the UK, the Institute for Jewish Policy Research is running its own national survey of the general population to gauge their attitudes toward Jews and related issues. And they're also doing special analyses of certain subgroups which are thought to harbor maybe greater level of anti-Semitism from the far right, among Muslims, and others in British society, and that should be coming out in the coming year. In Norway, its Center for Holocaust Studies and Religious Minorities will be conducting in this coming year a follow-up survey to its extensive survey done in 2012. And this new analysis will not only provide a broad picture of attitudes on the part of Norwegian society, but they will be doing a special subgroup focus on Norwegian Muslims and with Norwegian Jews to get a better feel for their attitudes and their experiences. In Sweden, the Forum for Living History conducts regular surveys of the attitudes of students in Sweden. Its earlier survey in 2010, which identified or allowed students to identify themselves by religion, showed that a much higher level of anti-Jewish attitudes were present among those identified as Muslims than as Christians. This is data that people have focused on, again, to try and see what can be done to address it. A more recent survey isn't quite as clear in providing these comparisons, but overall it's a vehicle to tell us more. I should also add that the National Center in Sweden that records all hate crimes, again, it does not identify perpetrators of crimes, but its director shared with us that they probably could say more about perpetrators of specific crimes. Now, let me also point out a couple of new initiatives which I think are worthy of citing here at this meeting. In Malmö, Sweden, but with the support of the Swedish Ministry of Culture and Democracy, the Jewish community is looking to engage a new rabbi with a specific role and focus of engaging in Jewish-Muslim interreligious dialogue. Since Malmö has such a large international, a large immigrant population, this would be a special contribution to some of the tensions we've seen in that city. Also, I should point out that in 2015, the Norwegian Parliament called on its government to prepare an action plan to confront anti-Semitism in Norway. On our recent visit, we had the occasion to meet with the key members of Parliament that had proposed this, as well as government officials who are preparing this plan. The plan itself will be presented in a very short time on October 6th in Oslo. But based on conversations, I think we already see that it's a plan that addresses not only security issues facing the Jewish community, but a much more broad and comprehensive array of matters in the area of education and public awareness. It, I think, potentially stands out to be a new and important best practice model for other governments to pick up. Let me note also in passing some of the concerns we see these days in Eastern Europe. The issues are really different there than in many of the Western European countries. We continue to be concerned that Hungary harbors one of the most openly xenophobic and anti-Semitic political parties, the Jobbik Party, which sits quite comfortably now in Parliament. I think it has been exerting a general pull to the right in the society at large. Most recently, there's been criticism of the government for presenting a special award, a decoration to the journalist Zsolt Baer, someone noted for his anti-Roma and his anti-Semitic invective. As a result, over 100 people who also received this high decoration from previous Hungarian governments have returned them in protest, but the government so far has done nothing. I made a country visit earlier this spring here in Poland. It has, as everyone knows, a rightward-focused, more nationalist government, and it has also presented some disturbing developments. In purporting to defend Polish honor, it's raised some troubling questions about the history of the Holocaust in Poland, about the willingness to confront the role of Polish collaborators. And there are new legislative measures that have been introduced that really threaten to stifle open debate and even criminalize some of those critical voices. In closing, let me just note that in May of this year, the 31-member International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IRA, meeting in Romania, adopted the working definition of anti-Semitism. It indicated that while this is a non-legally binding definition, it is something that provides a very clear and succinct description of anti-Semitism. It enumerates really the various forms it can take. It's an important tool for governments, for civil society. It can be used in training materials for police, for judges, for prosecutors. In fact, its usefulness was cited explicitly in the concluding statement by the OSCE chairperson in office in 2014 at the 10th anniversary Berlin conference on anti-Semitism. The current German chair in office has expressed its interest in trying to achieve a decision at the Hamburg Ministerial that would follow something along the lines of what IRA has done, and there'll be more about this in particular at the side event that has been organized for this Thursday, which will include NGOs and government participation, as well as participation from the current chairperson in office. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi Baker. I turn now to our next speaker, Professor Bülent Şenay. Professor Şenay is an associate professor of history, religion, and culture at the Uludağ University in Bursa, Turkey. He also serves as the personal representative of the OSCE chairperson in office on combating intolerance and discrimination against Muslims. Following his PhD in religious studies and philosophy from Lancaster University, Professor Şenay started as a lecturer on philosophy of Islam and ethics at the University College of St. Martin's. His research interest is focused on culture, religion, and identity in multicultural societies, Christian, Jewish, Muslim relations, religion, and politics in Europe. Professor Dr. Şenay has been a participant at both academic and diplomatic level in the Intercultural Exchange Project of the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. He has been a member of the OSCE Advisory Council for Freedom of Religion or Belief, and finally is a former diplomatic counselor for religious and cultural affairs at the Turkish Embassy in The Hague, Netherlands. Professor Şenay, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the German chairmanship for facilitating all the necessary work for our mandate, and also would like to thank the ODIHR team for doing their best to help us with our country visits or otherwise other works. I'd like to use my time to share with you a few points only, because many of you around this table are familiar with the discussion on anti-Muslim hatred or Islamophobic hate crimes, and there are many reports, research reports, also government reports which cover some of the areas. But as Mr. Matthew Collins asks, what the question is, what the participating states should do about it, and I have few answers to that. The first point I'd like to share here, and I agree with Rabbi Baker that we had useful visits, fruitful visits to various participating states, but I will personally not go into elaborating my side of the observations, Sweden and Britain, in this platform, because there will be a report coming out eventually, hopefully. But use the opportunity to thank the British delegation and the Swedish delegation for their wonderful organization and welcome for our work and the cooperation. But one thing I can say in relation to our country visits, or in relation to our observations during our country visits, is that nobody disagrees that there is an increase in Islamophobia, or whatever you call it, the anti-Muslim hatred. There's a spike, it's a serious problem, but then the issue is how we proceed in combating it at legislative level, educational level, and public discourse level. One of the reasons why we are struggling, and you see these on the screens on the both sides, that is scrolling on the Ministerial Council decisions and recommendations, where there's a strong language encouraging, calling upon the participating states to implement certain standards, and this has been going on for years. A lot of emphasis on deploring all sorts of racism and xenophobia. One of the reasons I believe there's a gap between, let's say, diplomatic agreement on the problem and actually putting it into practice is the issue of recognition and definition in relation to Islamophobia. And behind this problem, Islamophobia, in my personal view, as personal representative of the chair in office on combating intolerance and discrimination against Muslims in the OSCE region, my observation is that there's a strong reason behind this. That is that today, discriminating against an entire ethnicity is a taboo, it's a crime, but religion-based racism is generally considered to be exercising freedom of opinion. We have to get out of this vicious circle, and we should consider that Islamophobia is a hate crime. It is time that we should recognize it and put it into our legal system. Of course, with a delicate language. There are mixed motives behind it, and we should take that into account. If criticism of Islam and Muslims appear acceptable in general terms, because it's not seen as classically racist and xenophobic, then we have a serious problem threatening our peaceful coexistence. And yes, the intersectionality of the problem is obvious too. And in most of the countries in the OSCE region, Islamophobic hate speech rhetoric and therefore crimes eventually. In some countries, hundreds of attacks, small scale, large scale mosques, and you all know about these things. It's reached to a point of threatening our public cohesion. And this happens in a worrisome context on the EU front relevant to the refugee challenge. In this context of refugee challenge, that fear-mongering about Islam and demonizing Muslims have become more and more worrisome. Yesterday, I took the opportunity to go to Auschwitz. And not being from Jewish background, I still felt the smell of death and the heavy memory in Auschwitz. But do you know that when you speak more and more Muslim communities in Europe, you may find this a little extreme, but they are worried about larger scale, if you like, extermination, maybe in the next decade or so. People, Muslim communities in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Britain are talking about catastrophic endings for some of the Muslim communities in Europe. If they start talking about this, this is really worrying. According to ODIHR hate crime reporting, at the end of the day, Islamophobic hate crimes are either underreported or not recorded as Islamophobic hate crimes. If police and intelligence officials still refuse to rank violent attacks towards Muslims as Islamophobic hate crimes independently, but grouped it within the broad category of xenophobia, this means that hostility against Islam is purposefully blurred out. And we don't do much about the policy change. If we don't recognize the problem, we don't create a policy. We don't start a change in policy. Also, there is a worrying shift of anti-Muslim hatred, individual and institutional, as again Mr. Collins underlined, from the margins to the mainstream. It is also a question of representation and stereotyping, as usual. Through media representation of Muslims and Islam, hate speech eventually turn into hate crimes against Muslims. Media outlets all over Europe all too often engage in us versus them presentation of Muslim communities that incorporates an alleged incompatibility between Islam and European values. If you don't shake hands, get out of my country. This is openly said. It's another story whether the person who didn't shake hands did the right thing or wrong. It's one thing. But to mention this at the highest level of the politics is another. To the level of influencing the government policy. In his manifesto, let me give you an example about how far this can go. In his manifesto entitled 2083, A European Declaration of Independence, Andrew Breivik draws on this issue. It is in his writings, it is the narrative of a perpetual historical war between Christianity and Islam. He does this by laying out his xenophobic worldview, which includes support for varying degrees of cultural conservatism, right-wing populism, ultranationalism, Islamophobia, nationalist paramilitarism, and far-right Zionism. It further argues for the violent annihilation of Islam, Eurabia, cultural Marxism, and multiculturalism to preserve so-called a Christian Europe. Now, the question is, do we really think that these are just marginal views of the few marginals? And we all know about how far this binary view of the East and West can go. What is also problematic here is the securitarian policies. The question is, how far can we go in limiting freedom of religion to grant security, or to put it in a better way, what are the best strategies and tools to harmonize the former with the latter? Attached to this is the question of state neutrality. No state is neutral in religious studies. It's a fantasy from both academic perspective and in terms of the policy framework. State neutrality is always embedded in a larger context, and as religion is part of this, a religiously neutral state is inconceivable. I know what's going on in most of in our minds, the French model, Enlightenment, post-Enlightenment, church-state conflict, all of it. But we are far further from this debate on church and state. There is something else here. Each state has legitimate concern about terrorism and security, but it's important not to stigmatize a community. What I propose here is a term which I can define as embedded even-handedness rather than neutrality. Embedded even-handedness towards religious communities. To wrap it up, I have 7 points for the implementation of these, combating intolerance and discrimination against Muslims. The first thing is that the participating states should commit to a recording of Islamophobia as a category of hate crime by all police, working with social media companies to protect free speech while developing good guidelines to tackle hate speech online. Consider primary legislation to deal with social media offenses and hate speech online. The second one is that they should commit to developing teaching materials to educate young people on Islamophobia, racism, and anti-Semitism, because there is an overlap between anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in certain contexts. To fund projects to promote educational programs on Islam awareness, to prioritize religious education in the national curriculum to prepare young people for life in a religiously plural society. The third point, they have to commit to tackling religious discrimination in the workplace and address the low level of economic activity among Muslims through targeted interventions at stages of recruitment, retention, and promotion, improving access to employment for Muslim women particularly. And we've listened to many stories and cases on these issues in both Sweden and UK recently. The fourth point is that they have to commit to support the adoption of the EU Equal Treatment Directive to advance protection against discrimination on the grounds of religion to education, healthcare, housing, access to goods and services, and social protection. 5, commit to preserving the Human Rights Act and the protection of minority rights, including rights to religious slaughter, circumcision, and wearing of religious dress and symbols. 6, commit to curbing the encroachment of counterterrorism policies on civil liberties by working with Muslim communities, not against them, in the so-called de-radicalization programs. The 7th point is, in terms of the implementation, is that they have to commit to democracy and human rights promotion abroad. So it's important, the political language. Democracy in Europe, in the West, but not democracy outside Europe and the West. This has an impact on the way Muslims perceive the discourse in the OSCE region. Therefore, we need sustainable strategies and raise more awareness through intercultural educational policies. Last but not least, we hope that the Ministerial Council deliverable, a working definition or decision on combating intolerance and discrimination against Muslims can be adopted soon. We also hope and expect that the current chairmanship and the next chairmanship uses its power to secure a stable budget to support activities on combating intolerance and discrimination against Muslims. We expect an equal treatment to ODIHR work on eradicating anti-Muslim hate crimes and hatred and crimes. On fundamental level, therefore, let us listen to what our souls say, not what our politics say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you very much to all of our speakers. I turn now to the speaking list and would take this opportunity to remind participants of the following. First is that, again, we have a full list, so you will have 2 minutes for your intervention. I apologize in advance. I must be very strict about those 2 minutes, as we do have a very full list at the moment. I would ask that on first speaking, you please introduce yourself, your name and organization or delegation or institute that you represent. Please, again, in the interest of time, keep your comments brief and to the point, preferably listing first recommendations. Criticism is welcome, of course, but should be constructive. And again, you are discouraged from reading prepared statements, which can, of course, be submitted to the Document and Distribution Center and then distributed to all participants. So with this, I would turn to the first organization on our speakers list, Atheist Ireland, to be followed by Giuseppe Dossetti.
I'm Michael Nugent, chairperson of Atheist Ireland. Atheist Ireland supports the OSCE in specifically addressing discrimination and prejudice-motivated crimes against Jews, Muslims, Christians, and members of other religions. We recommend that you also specifically address such discrimination against atheists. We further recommend that you tackle prejudice-motivated crimes against ex-Muslim atheists and against Ahmadiyya Muslims. Atheist Ireland supports the newly formed Ex-Muslims of Ireland group, one of whose members has already received a death threat for apostasy. These are not idle threats. Recently in Scotland, a Sunni Muslim murdered an Ahmadi shopkeeper because of his religious beliefs. We recommend that genitally mutilating girls and forcing women to wear specific clothing should be treated as prejudice-motivated crimes based on gender and on religion. We should challenge anti-Muslim bigotry, but we should not describe it as Islamophobia. This propaganda word conflates bigotry against people, which is bad, with criticism of religion, which is necessary and good. We recommend that the OSCE promotes the separation of state from either religion or atheism as the foundation of protecting everybody's rights equally. Atheist Ireland campaigns for this type of secularism in Ireland, along with the Evangelical Alliance of Ireland and the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community of Ireland. But the Irish state claims that it is constitutionally obliged, not merely permitted, but obliged to allow religious discrimination in order to buttress religion. The chairs of both UN human rights committees have strongly criticised Ireland in this regard. We have a law against blasphemy, which is cited by the Islamic states at the United Nations to buttress their attempts to promote defamation of religion laws. And 9 different sets of UN bodies have recommended that Ireland stop breaching the human rights of atheists and non-religious and secular parents and families in the education system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We now turn to Giuseppe Dossetti, Observatory for Religious Tolerance and Freedom, to be followed by Slovakia on behalf of the EU.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm Mattia Ferrero, coordinator of the Giuseppe Dossetti Observatory. The situation of Christian communities in the USC area raises serious concerns and seems able to erode social cohesion inside the participating states and confidence between them. Both east and west of Vienna, there are recurring hate-motivated incidents and hate crimes against Christians that can even result in the murder of individuals, while profanation of Christian cemeteries and churches is a daily reality. Data collected and made available by the ODIHR show us that crimes committed due to religious hatred mainly and increasingly target places of worship, cemeteries, and other religious properties. About 60–70% of anti-Semitic hate crimes and hate crimes motivated by religious bias or prejudice were committed against properties. This year, a participating states has established a security funding scheme for the provision of protective security for places of worship, while a federated state of another participating state has passed a law allowing houses of worship to establish security programs under which designated members are authorized to carry firearms to protect the congregation. In the city where I live, Milan, Italy, the magnificent cathedral and many other churches in the city center are guarded 24 hours by the military. An article of a world-known newspaper argued that it is impossible to protect all the religious premises in France, most of which are Christian, since it would be necessary to use 368,000 people from police or military to this end. This is the reality where we are living now. The effects of this phenomenon cannot easily be overestimated. They may foster a climate of fear and intimidation, thus threatening existing religious pluralism and undermining peace and stability of the whole OSCE area. Going to a church, mosque, or synagogue is not a luxury, neither can become an act of heroism. It is a fundamental freedom that should be guaranteed to everyone. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much. Turn now to Slovakia on behalf of the European Union, to be followed by Human Rights Without Frontiers.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. And our statement is also on behalf of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Norway, Moldova, and Andorra. We have a statement prepared and we will distribute it in writing, but please allow me to read out the recommendations we have for this session, and I will do so in French. La lutte contre la discrimination.
The fight against discrimination and all forms of intolerance is one of the European Union's priorities, both within its internal domestic policy and its foreign policy and its international cooperation policy, including at the OSCE. Our main recommendations are the following. For participating states, to ensure that every individual may enjoy without distinction their human rights and fundamental freedoms and have effective means of recourse in the case of discrimination or other violation of their rights and freedoms. Favour learning about diversity, dialogue and tolerance, and deconstruct prejudices through promoting human rights and inclusive and solid societies based on solidarity, to systematically condemn appeals to hatred, no matter who the perpetrators are, their reasons, or the individuals targeted, encourage these hate crimes being reported, to cooperate actively with the ODIHR to prevent and combat all forms of intolerance, particularly through contributing to its statistics on hate crimes. Secondly, for participating states, their executive structures and the institutions of civil society and civil society. We have the following 4 recommendations: to keep an inclusive approach to the fight against intoleration and discrimination based on the universality of human rights and the fight against all forms of discrimination without distinction; to ensure that the activities of the OSCE in the area of fighting intolerance and discrimination reaffirms our cohesion on the basis of common principles, including the fight against all forms of intolerance and the equal dignity of all human beings without exception; to better take into account the multiple forms of discrimination in the promotion of human rights and the fight against intolerance; and finally, to encourage a better coordination of the work of the representatives, personal representatives of the chairmanship with the ODIHR for better coherence and effectiveness of activities within the human dimension of the OSCE. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now move to Human Rights Without Frontiers, to be followed by the delegation of the United States of America.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My statement will be about the Yarovaya laws on anti-extremism and anti-evangelism in Russia, and I will start with the recommendations as time is very short. So our NGO, Human Rights Without Frontiers, recommends to the authorities of the Russian Federation to put a moratorium on the implementation of this law, which restricts missionary activities and has already been used to criminalize activities on non-Orthodox religions and their members. 2, second point, to take into consideration the 100,000 signatures gathered by an online petition posted on the state-owned portal of Russian Public Initiative and directed against the Yarovaya's package of laws. 3, to have the Yarovaya law assessed by the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe. This law was signed by the President Vladimir Putin on the 7th of July. It places broad limitations on missionary work, including preaching, teaching, engaging in any activity designed to invite people into a religious group. The penalties for violation of this law are severe. It can go up to $800 for individuals and to over $15,000 for organizations. As I said, the law has already made its first victims. 2 weeks ago, the law was misused against 2 Americans who attended a religious service of Word of Life in Kaluga and were fined 3,000 rubles each. Also, a Pentecostal student from Ghana was fined for illegal evangelism in Fur and was sentenced to 15,000 rubles. And the last example, quite recently as well, a Seventh-day Adventist pastor was charged for delivering religious books to government personnel. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We remind all speakers, please do introduce yourself and your organization as you take the floor. I turn now to the delegation of the United States of America, to be followed by Baha'i International Community, Brussels office.
Thank you, moderator. All human beings are born equal in rights and dignity. My country has constitutional protections against discrimination, but as the head of our Civil Rights Division said, quote, "We still see a real gap between what the law guarantees and what people experience. Closing this gap means vigorously enforcing voting rights, reforming local police departments, and protecting diverse religious communities," end quote. Good data is essential to good policy. Only 1/4 of participating states provide data for ODIHR's hate crimes website. States should disaggregate information such as on persons of African descent. We commend the Chair's initiative, Turning Words into Actions. A side event on Thursday will explore ways to recognize and address contemporary anti-Semitism. Stigmatizing all Muslims for the terrible acts of a few is unacceptable. We applaud efforts that bring Christian, Muslim, Jewish, and other communities together. LGBTI persons have the same human rights as everyone else. Several countries' laws harm such individuals. Hungary uses anti-migrant rhetoric and conflates migration and terrorism. It has given an award to a racist colonist, and it and others have rehabilitated anti-Semites and vicious nationalists. I look forward to the event at the Poland Museum. It, like the Warsaw Uprising Museum, helps establish a factual basis for discussion, as does our new Museum on African American History. We oppose laws that criminalize characterizations of history. The characterization that generated a proposed law in Poland concerning death camps is factually wrong, but that is not a good reason to criminalize speech. Russia should repeal its law criminalizing wittingly spreading false information about the activity of the Union of Socialist Republics during World War II. Nor is combating hate-mongering speech a job for the courts. Political leaders bear a responsibility to condemn expressions of intolerance and efforts to fan hatred. We encourage all to attend tonight's event on building coalitions to combat hate at 6 p.m. in the Belvedere Room. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much. And now turn to Baha'i International Community Brussels office, to be followed by SOVA Center for Information and Analysis. And again, a reminder to please do introduce yourself to the room.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My name is Rochelle Bayani. I'm the representative of the Baha'i International Community to the European institutions. One of the most pressing concerns that is facing European society and will continue to face European society is the question about how different people of different backgrounds are to live together. And within this question, one predominant concern is how to counter racism and xenophobia. And naturally and importantly, a lot of our thinking and work will go into devising strategies to counter these different and specific forms of prejudice. The Baha'i International Community, however, believes that of equal importance is the need for all of us really to gain a deeper understanding of that which unites us. We believe that the ability to articulate what our common humanity consists of is what ultimately underlines our commitment to the elimination of prejudice. In a society as diverse as European society is today, we can no longer identify solely with our particular characteristics. In other words, with that which we're different. We need a conception of our identity that is much wider. We need a conception of our identity which includes all of the human family. And it is therefore that the Baha'i International Community encourages the OSCE to explore how educational processes, whether in the framework of school curricula or beyond, can help nurture in this generation and the generation to come a rich, robust, and expansive sense of our common identity, and develop amongst European populations a strong loyalty with and responsibility towards all of humanity, rather than only towards those sharing similar social, culture, or other characteristics.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the SOVA Center, to be followed by the European Center for Democracy and Development.
Thank you, Ms. Moderator. I'm Alexander Verkhovsky, SOVA Center, Russia, and I will speak in Russian, so please take your headphones. Постараюсь коротко.
I'll try to be brief and talk about some of the points of the intervention that we're going to post on the internet together with the recommendations. There are still some issues with the legislation in the OSCE area in legislation pertaining to our issue that we're discussing today. For example, there isn't a clear line between hate crime and religious crime. However, of course, there is no agreement on where the level of criminality is for expressions of opinion, but there's an ever greater problem in the area of application of the law. Improving the practice is possible through creating a more appropriate system for reporting. For example, in Russia, due to the merging of two crimes into one category, it shows that violent crimes and hatred are going up ever more, but the number of people condemned for hate speech last year has gone up to 500. You must understand that the legislation in this area and political approach were, of course, established at a time when the main sources of ideas for intolerance were books or speeches by political leaders on the television or the radio. Now the sources are decentralized through horizontal networks, and the number of sources has increased greatly due to moving to the internet. The old mechanism either doesn't work, or it increases the number of sentences, or it does both. We must orient ourselves towards organized discussion and not an approach of criminalizing it. All of our recommendations we will provide in a written form. We encourage the ODIHR to continue with its expert work in this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now turn to the European Center for Democracy and Development, to be followed by the Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe.
Thank you very much. My name is Valery Engel. I'm the president of the European Center for Democracy. I will speak Russian if possible.
I'd like to draw your attention to the role played by investigative work by authorities and also by the Christian Church in combating discrimination and overcoming hatred. I'd like to say that in the statistics, and it's strange, in 2015, there was in fact a decline in anti-immigrant opinions in all countries except for Hungary and Poland. In all other countries, anti-immigration feelings were expressed less. Now, Poland and Hungary are countries where you don't have large concentrations of immigrants compared to Greece and Italy. But in 2015, anti-Islamic feelings increased. Anti-Semitic and anti-Roma feelings declined, but they were replaced by anti-Islamist feelings. And it's important to understand why this happened. If we look at what the governments of Greece and Italy and other countries did in order to improve the approach to immigrants, a lot was done in public campaigns. But if we look at what was done by the Hungarian government in 2015, well, the impact was the opposite. Now, the Pew Research Center of the United States tried to get an answer to the simple question, is it important to be a Christian, to be a real citizen of your country? Well, in countries like Greece, Poland, Italy, Hungary, a large number of respondents answered in the affirmative. So it means that improving tolerance is really in the hands of the Christian Church. I'm not saying the Christian Church is at fault, but I'm just saying that they have the solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe, to be followed by ADF International.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Ellen Fantini. I'm the Executive Director of the Observatory. 2015 was the worst year in modern history for the persecution of Christians. The European Parliament, the United States Department of State, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, and many political and faith leaders have all labeled the systematic targeting and killing of Christians and other religious minorities in Iraq and Syria as genocide. With the flow of refugees and asylum seekers to Europe, a new challenge for participating states has emerged: the protection of the most vulnerable asylum seekers, Christians fleeing persecution and genocide. The observatory offers the following specific recommendations to participating states: to provide disaggregated data on hate crimes, paying due attention to hate crimes against Christians in all areas, including where they are a majority; to register the religious affiliation of refugees and asylum seekers at reception centers; declare the systematic targeting and killing of Christians and other religious minorities in Iraq and Syria as genocide; recognize the special status of Christians and other religious minorities, and receive refugees and asylum seekers from alternate channels instead of solely from UNHCR camps; train and educate police, social welfare office staff, and accommodation security on the topic of religiously motivated conflict; improve the balance in ethnic and religious composition of refugees, as well as staff, security, and translators in asylum centers; and remove offending staff and incidences of religiously motivated bias or violence; permit anonymous reporting of religiously motivated incidents; protect whistleblowers; remove perpetrators from accommodations, and deport violent offenders; support private accommodations for Christians; and as a last resort or a temporary measure, in the absence of the above-mentioned protections, establish separate accommodations for Christian refugees; compile and publish a national report on crimes, including against Christians, and adopt a national action plans in order to prevent and effectively respond to hate crimes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to ADF International, to be followed by the delegation of Turkey.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Lawrence Wilkinson. I'm legal counsel with ADF International in Strasbourg. Despite the fact that the European Court of Human Rights has clearly articulated that speech which is offensive, shocking, or disturbing is protected under the European Convention of Human Rights, there is an ever-increasing inclination in Europe to criminalize speech which is deemed indecent or offensive under the banner of tackling hate crime. The European Commission recently indicated what the trajectory of tackling hate speech looks like when it presented the Code of Conduct on illegal hate speech online in May of this year, in collaboration with IT giants Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Microsoft. Under this Code of Conduct, not only is the definition of hate speech vague and difficult to articulate, but the Code currently fails to provide for any judicial or quasi-judicial appeal mechanism which would allow citizens to vindicate their right to freedom of expression online. Therefore, the Code of Conduct as it stands constitutes a real threat to the citizens' freedom of expression and right to a fair trial, and it does not reflect the democratic values of plurality, tolerance, and respect for all that should be firmly in mind when considering measures to combat hate crime. The ultimate effect of these kinds of measures, clamping down on hate speech, is a chilling effect that will stop people from expressing their opinion and halting conversation on controversial issues that most warrant debate and discussion. Rather than fostering open conversation on contentious issues, dialogue is being driven underground before rearing its ugly head in other places. Therefore, ADF International strongly urges the OSCE to restate the foundational importance of freedom of expression, particularly as applied to undesirable ideas and minority opinions. ADF International further calls on participating states to repeal vaguely worded hate speech laws and ensure that adequate safeguards against abuse of restrictions on freedom of expression are established to ensure exchange in the marketplace of ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the delegation of Turkey, to be followed by delegation Italy.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. In our statement during the opening plenary session, we underlined the importance Turkey attributes to combating intolerance and discrimination in the OSCE area. Racism, xenophobia, intolerance, and discrimination regrettably continue to number among the most formidable challenges facing our organization. Muslims, Jews, Christians, Roma, and Sinti, as well as others, remain subject to discrimination in many participating states. While despicable phenomena such as anti-Semitism persist, Islamophobia, long on the rise, is now becoming more acute than ever due to the repercussions of the refugee and migration crisis. The pressing need to fight Islamophobia was addressed by Professor Şenay in his introductory statement. For our part, and without being insensitive to similar crimes against other groups, we attach great significance to preventing and combating Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate crimes. Let me also re-emphasize in this context a strong correlation between intolerance, discrimination, and radicalization, as well as how alienation and marginalization and discrimination and intolerance mutually reinforce one another. These dynamics accentuate the importance of how Muslims are portrayed in public discourse, including in the media or by politicians. Anti-migrant and anti-Muslim public discourse both fuels and normalizes prejudice and intolerance against Muslim migrants, reinforcing social exclusion, alienation, and radicalization from among their ranks. And needless to say, extremists trying to divide our societies along artificial fault lines derive particular satisfaction from such trends. Madam Moderator, some recommendations. We believe that all participating states should acknowledge the threat of Islamophobia and take the necessary legal, administrative, and educational measures to combat manifestations of anti-Muslim sentiment, including hate crimes against Muslims. Islamophobia should be acknowledged as a contemporary form of racism and xenophobia by the OSCE as well. Participating states should develop training programs on Islamophobia for law enforcement officers and other public officials, as well as for teachers, clergy, and imams. They should cooperate to address intolerant public discourse concerning Muslims, including by political leaders, in the media, and on the internet. And in conclusion, let me stress our hope that today's discussions will contribute to the deliverables on enhancing efforts to combat intolerance and discrimination against Muslims as well as Christians, which we expect to be adopted at the Hamburg Ministerial Council in line with our clear tasking from the Basel Declaration on enhancing efforts to combat anti-Semitism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the delegation of Italy, to be followed by the International Association of Independent Democrats Against Authoritarian Regimes.
Grazie, signora moderatrice. L'Italia.
Thank you, moderator. Italy is very much in line with the statement made by Slovakia on behalf of the European Union. It is my honor to take the floor in the name of Italy to reaffirm our adhesion to the values of human dignity, freedom, democracy, the rule of law. That is what the European Union is based on. Italy supports the rights set out in the European Union Charter and is opposed to any form of discrimination based on religion, faith, physical disadvantage, sexual orientation, sex. Italy fully honors its commitments under the OSCE, supporting equality, democracy, non-discrimination, tolerance, and supports the work of ODIHR, and is always prepared to submit its annual report on hate crime to the OSCE. It is absolutely essential for a healthy democracy, for the rule of law, that we combat hate crime, but at the same time, of course, we must protect freedom of expression within a democratic framework. Over the years, Italy has provided itself with standard setting and operational measures that make it possible to combat racism, xenophobia, and hate crime. This also includes positive measures, victim protection, but also case law in civil law and in criminal law. Italy believes that the promotion of an appropriate national and international system must include full transparency and information of civil society. There must be measures that are top-down and bottom-up to win the war against hate crime. The rest of my statement is available in writing to all participants.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the International Association of the Independent Democrats Against Authoritarian Regimes, to be followed by the delegation of the Holy See. Please do introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm a coordinator of this international association that has just been mentioned. Discrimination, yes, it exists in all countries, but the proportions are important. In countries with a dictatorship, the discrimination of individuals is almost 100%. But what is the highest form of discrimination? It is, of course, a threat against the life of an individual. Just a few examples. Dozens of political prisoners have disappeared, which means that the Berdi Muhammadov, the dictator, simply killed them. Farid Balin, a leader of human rights protection in Turkmenistan, was threatened in Austria, where he now lives. Here in Poland, there have been threats against the lives of the coordinators of our association. I myself believe that I was attacked, that there was an attempt on my life by the KGB of the dictator Lukashenko. In Uzbekistan on the 20th of September, dozens of policemen entered the home of Mirzayeva Inobat, and she ended up in hospital. In Belarus, on 11 September, the election performance was brought to an end. There were supposedly candidates and there were no problems and so on. But then suddenly the police started to repress those who were involved, the candidates and their supporters. Here's a copy, in fact, of a letter of the policeman. But in Poland, of course, now we know that there is a problem, but there is discrimination in Poland against non-citizens who try to defend their rights in Poland through courts. The director of ODIHR, Mr. Link, has said that the OSCE has sent out a signal. There will be a combating of all forms of discrimination. We certainly hope that that will occur. And our recommendation would be that BDIC also look at other forms of discrimination and not just based on religion. Thank you. There are many of them.
Now to the delegation of the Holy See, to be followed by the delegation Ukraine.
Madam Moderator,
yes.
The Holy See has always insisted and continues to insist on the respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion as an essential factor for peace, justice, and welfare necessary to ensure the development of friendly relations and cooperation between the participating states. Its participation in the OSCE and active presence and engagement in the human dimension are expression of the Holy See's continued desire to affirm and defend the dignity of every human person. Therefore, the Holy See deplores hate crimes, acts of intolerance, discrimination, and violence against any human person, and has repeatedly and decisively condemned violence against people and every sign of unjust discrimination. Our delegation notes with profound concern and deplores that in the entire OSCE area, many persons and communities continue to be subject to threats or acts of hostility or violence as a result of their racial, ethnic, or religious identity, or victims of other acts of intolerance and discrimination. Specific issues of serious concern are the hate crimes and incidents perpetrated against places of worship and other religious properties in the whole OSCE area, and the inequality and discrimination suffered by women. Acts of intolerance and discrimination pose a threat to the social cohesion of and within the participating states, affecting not only the victims, but also the wider community. However, not all acts of discrimination pose a direct threat to the stability in the international community, or are likely to trigger violence and conflict on a wider scale, putting in danger the peaceful relations among the states. Finally, I would like to add also that the Holy See would like to stress yet again that in accordance with the indivisibility, independence, and interrelations of human rights, the commitments on tolerance and non-discrimination cannot be separated from long-standing commitments to freedom of religion and belief. The implementation of the first requires that the latter should also be fully implemented. Tolerance, in fact, cannot be an alibi for denying or not guaranteeing religious freedom. On the other hand, tolerance and non-discrimination cannot be used or interpreted in a way that would restrict the freedom of religion or belief or other fundamental freedoms. The full version of my statement will be distributed in written. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much. Turn now to the delegation of Ukraine, to be followed by delegation Canada.
Good afternoon, participants. I'm Valeza Konstantin from Ukraine. Ukraine is interested in forming a community of religions. We are reforming our legal system. The most serious reform is in the national police. The structure of the police was created in order to ensure the protection of human rights. All the staff go to training on human rights, which is supported by the Office of the Council of Europe in Ukraine. Staff are also monitored for their compliance with human rights in buildings belonging to the police. I also would like to note that all staff working for the police carry out a course on tolerance and non-discrimination, and then they have to pass an exam. Its obligations in the area of addressing the Council of Ministers of the OSCE's decisions. We also have statistics about hate crimes, which we provide to the ODIHR. In order to ensure taking these crimes into account, we have made changes to the means of direct reporting, where there is a paragraph saying, do you think that this crime was carried out because of hatred? And all hate crimes or discrimination crimes are checked or verified. Moreover, there is a department on radical groups, which is to counteract racial hate crimes. We also look at crimes in the area of discrimination. We note the fact that we cannot influence the investigation of crimes which are carried out against minorities in the area of Crimea, which is currently occupied by the Russian Federation. Moreover, there are terrorist organizations operating in the Donbass. The basis of crimes that we've seen has been a national affiliation. Thank you.
Thank you. I turn now to the delegation of Canada, to be followed by the Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Combating hate crime and tolerance and discrimination in all their forms is a key commitment made by OSCE participating states, and we thank our four panelists for launching discussions today. Canada appreciates the efforts of the German chair in office to address the broad scope of challenges through meetings such as the February Conference on Combating Intolerance and Discrimination Against Muslims and the upcoming Berlin Conference on Tolerance and Discrimination. We also, in the context of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, strongly supported the adoption of a working definition of anti-Semitism. For participating states to be effective in addressing all forms of hate crimes and discrimination, a solid legal and policy framework must be in place, supported by training, education, and awareness raising. But to truly counter and reverse the trend of growing xenophobia globally, we must also address the negative political and public discourse on diversity and migration. Madam Moderator, colleagues, diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice. And for Canada, a country with 1/5 of its population born abroad, this choice is guided by the clear economic, social, cultural, and civic benefits that diversity can bring when it is leveraged locally, nationally, and internationally. In other words, we believe that diversity is a source of strength, not weakness. Our country is strong, not in spite of our differences, but because of them. But inclusion is not easy. It does not happen by accident. It takes time, deliberate effort, and requires leadership from every individual, every business, and every community. Canada's path to inclusion has not been uniformly smooth. We have struggled, and we continue to face challenges to fully advance gender equality or to face up to our difficult past in our relationship with Canada's Indigenous peoples. Allow me to conclude with one example of Canada's recent efforts at ensuring equal rights for all its citizens and advancing our combat against discrimination. On May 17th, Canada's Minister of Justice tabled a bill to add gender identity and gender expression to the list of prohibited grounds for discrimination and as an aggravating factor when sentencing a person for a hate-motivated crime. We look forward to hearing from other participants on practical measures that can be adopted to advance our collective efforts at combating discrimination and achieving equal rights for all. The full text of our remarks will be shared online. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights, to be followed by the Religious Society Path Guru Java.
Thank you, moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, Afronidov from the Institute for Democracy and Human Rights in Azerbaijan. Today's subject is very topical, and it is very important for preserving a peaceful coexistence in the world. Throughout history, chauvinism and nationalism have resulted in war and death of human beings. Let me say a few words about multiculturalism. Azerbaijan is a cradle of multiculturalism in the world. 2016 was declared the year of multiculturalism in Azerbaijan. This resulted in a lot of measures being implemented. The author of today's multiculturalism is the people of Azerbaijan. Our national minorities constitute 10% of our population. We have Jews, Kurds, Tatars, Lezgins, Molokkans, Roma, Germans, Russians, and even Armenians. And I stressed Armenians because today 20% of our territory is currently occupied by Armenians. And there have been attempts to engage in ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh that resulted in 1 million Azerbaijanis leaving that territory. There isn't a single one left. And yet we still have 30,000 Armenians who live peacefully in Azerbaijan. We also are working hard to ensure religious tolerance. Baku is the only city where within 1 square kilometer you can find an Orthodox church, a mosque, and a Christian church. People peacefully walk the streets from all different walks of life, from all different religions. For us, that is absolutely normal. And I think the model of Azerbaijani multiculturalism could be usefully studied by other countries. Today in Paris, Berlin, Geneva, and elsewhere, synagogues are being protected by policemen with machine guns. In Baku, we don't need to do that.
Very much. We turn now to the Religious Society Path Guru Java, to be followed by the delegation of France.
Hello, my name is Martin Krajča, and I will be speaking about persecution of Guru Jara Barbara Plaskova and believers of New Czech Religious Society. Dear ladies and gentlemen, just 1 year ago, here at the Human Dimension Implementation Meeting, Soteria International called your urgent attention to the persecution of Mr. Jaroslav Dobeš, known as Guru Jara, and his closest disciple, Ms. Barbara Plaskova, in the Czech Republic. The claim of Soteria was confirmed this year by the report of the Religious Freedom of the US Department of State. Your case in the Czech Republic is mentioned in it. The systematic destruction and attack on your religious group was first initiated by anti-cult movement in the Czech Republic over 15 years ago. We recommend to the Czech authorities to issue a new passport to Jaroslav Dobeš and Barbara Plaskova, detained for being undocumented at the Immigration Detention Center of Manila in the Philippines since spring 2015, because the Czech embassy withdrew their passport. To take into consideration the cancellation of the sentence to a prison term of Jaroslav Dobeš and Barbara Plaskova by High Court of Olomouc and the ensuing presumption of innocence. To actively resolve the case of Guru Jara and Barbara Plaskova in a timely manner, with diplomacy and respect for basic human rights, the presumption of innocence, and the Geneva Conventions. To actively support and protect religious diversity and tolerance in the Czech society, and to prosecute cases of hate speech or hate crimes. Further recommendation could be found in the contribution of Human Rights Without Frontier, presented here at the conference on day 23rd September 2016, and in the report of a legal expert of Dr. Athanasios Panzapoulos, dated 21 September 2016. We are extremely grateful to every brave and open mind to human rights NGOs, politicians, or supporter who has dared to combat the prejudice in your case. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Turn now to the delegation of France, to be followed by the Russian Association for Religious Freedom.
Lutte contre le racisme et l'antisémitisme a été érigée en...
The fight against racism and Intolerance is an important issue. We have a national law for the 2015 to this plan for 2015-2017 brings together all the ministries and territorial collectivities and civil society. It's based on 4 essential pillars: to punish, educate, to convey the values of the Republic, and to fight against hate speech, particularly through the internet. To improve work in this area, France has improved its statistical tools so as to implement criminal measures. The Ministry for Judicial Matters has disaggregated data on racist acts, which are committed every year in order to implement a new anti-ministerial plan. The final stock-taking of this will also be communicated. In order to counteract all discrimination, society as a whole has to be involved. So the French government works with civil society and with representative organizations of Muslims and Jews in France. It is a question of jointly drawing up responses to acts committed against places of worship and education. In its fight against intolerance, the government does not privilege any reason for discrimination over another, whether it be anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim, anti-Christian, or anti-Rome. All of these are dealt with by the public authorities and judged as required. France calls on state participants in order to combat all forms of discrimination in a similar manner without privileging any kind of discrimination over others. Otherwise, we risk undermining our work on an international level in this regard, because tolerance and non-discrimination contribute to enjoying fundamental freedoms and human rights on an international level.
Thank you very much. Turn now to the Russian Association for Religious Freedom, to be followed by the All-Russian Public Organization, Russian Association of Protection of Religious Freedom.
Madam Moderator, dear colleagues, the main factor which has played a historic role in developing a European identity are the traditional spiritual values that are disseminated by all major religions that have a humanistic nature. But at the same time, over the last few years, we have seen a rise in religious intolerance vis-à-vis Christians, but also other faiths. Colleagues have referred to that. Among such phenomena, there are prohibitions to practice one's religion, refusals to build churches or other places of worship, undermining the freedom of expression of Christians, and it can become absurd. There are refusals not just by civil servants, but also civil society officials to wear religious symbols. And these negative trends have been caused by neoliberalism, which consider that all societies must be purely secular, and there is an imposition on European societies of certain practices that are completely unacceptable, such as single-sex marriages. It can go that far. And societal leaders and even religious leaders in supporting liberal values often say that these values are rooted in Christianity. But comparing homosexual coexistence in a couple to a traditional family, I don't think that that really does have Christian roots. So our association has prepared a report on freedom of conscience.
Commitment on non-discrimination. I would like to turn now to the All-Russian Public Organization, Russian Association of Protection of Religious Freedom, and ask that speakers identify themselves as well. Thank you.
I'm Oleg Goncharov. I'm the Secretary General of the All Russia Association for Protection and Religious Freedom. The so-called Ozarov-Yarovoy law entered into force. It is on counteracting terrorism and legislation in establishing further measures to counteract terrorism. The administration of the president has an official position on this law. It consists of the following. The aim of this federal law is to counteract extremism and terrorism on the territory of the Russian Federation. It is important to note that the law does not prohibit preaching on the territory of the Russian Federation, it only regulates it. Preaching in accordance with this law is defined as the action of religious associations spreading their religious convictions. And this applies to citizens of the Russian Federation and other people legitimately on the territory of the Russian Federation, and not in any way does it regulate their activities or restrict them. It also does not restrict activities in places of worship. No kind of restriction is provided for on religious literature and the circulation thereof. There is a constant monitoring of the situation by my organization, and we are collecting together illegitimate uses of this law. We can say that more than half of the cases that we have heard of have resulted in innocence and the removal of any sanctions under this law. The State Duma's commission expect to introduce amendments to this law, which may be introduced at the moment. The Russian believers have the free right to freedom of conscience and religion and to share their religious convictions. I would like to invite you to take note of this information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to turn now to ICLA, International Civil Liberties Alliance, to be followed by the Russian School in Estonia. ICLA.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, говоря о языке ненависти,
when talking about the language, about hate speech, I'd like to talk about the popular genre in Estonia of unpopular people. There's also a problem with the Russian community in Estonia. It's only the authors of this are trying to cause hate between Russian and Estonian communities. The Estonian parliamentarians officially declared that there is an internal threat from Russian people, but these people do love their country. It is absurd when members of the parliament say that these people who are playing pinball are going to attack the country. The actions of the police should be taken under control, and it does not help our country. It, in fact, damages it. The report on the activities of the police and security forces can be found on our website. It's accessible.
Thank you very much. We turn back now to ICLA, International Civil Liberties Alliance, to be followed by PAX Europe.
Bonjour. Je vais parler au nom.
Good morning. Afternoon, rather. I'm speaking on behalf of the International Civil Liberties Alliance. For some years, OSCE has had partnership with the Organization of the Islamic Conference. While this international organization has since 1990 had a text called the Islamic Declaration of Human Rights, a declaration which is a general directive for its member states. This declaration is an absolute denaturation of human rights as defined by the OSCE because they assimilate these with Sharia. The OSCE has been working for years to introduce into Western legal systems restrictions which are bad for liberty, which come from Sharia law. And it's under the constant pressure of the OSCE and its satellite organizations in this area that the OSCE has finished by using concepts such as religious racism and Islamophobia with the evident view to penalize them. Yet these concepts, if they're rationally examined, are completely absurd. The ICLA calls for an ethical and moral change in the representations of the participating countries. Do not give in to the pressure of manipulative theocrats who play the victim while they simply seek to impose Sharia and destroy human rights. Do not participate in the killing of liberty and freedoms which you should defend. Please desist from signing the successive Munich agreements, which bring you to the path of dishonor and treachery towards the nations that you represent. Break off these partnerships with the OIC and its front organizations until they've upgraded the Declaration of Human Rights and Islam.
PAX Europe, to be followed by Center for Research and Protection of Fundamental Rights.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Elizabeth Sabadich-Wolf, and I represent PAX Europa.
Добрый день.
Only 12 months.
Центр изучения и защиты основных прав.
The Center for Research and Protection of Fundamental Rights. Is that me now?
You are next, after PAX Europe.
So it's my turn.
Yes,
Thank you so much. Only 12 months ago in this very venue, PAX Europa voiced great concern about the implementation of ever more restrictions on freedom of expression in the OSCE area. The state of free expression has extensively deteriorated in the past year, not least due to the massive influx of migrants into the OSCE area. It is interesting to note here that where immigration rises, an increase in diversity of race, there's a decrease in the diversity of ideas allowed in expression. Recent developments in Germany are just one case in point. Aided by internet giants such as Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, the European Union announced a new online speech code. In response to this monitoring, German police recently raided the residence of at least 60 people who were suspected of posting quote-unquote agitation against immigrants on the internet. The German Justice Minister said, and I quote, "The resolute action of investigative authorities should motivate everyone to think before getting creative on Facebook. Everyone should take that to heart before opening his mouth. This is the German government's notification of feel the chilling effect." In recent years, the terms hate speech and hate crime have become the buzzwords used to shut down discourse in the OSCE region. More and more people, especially west of Vienna, are reported to the authorities for further investigation, taken to court, and convicted for hate speech. Those who were Charlie only a year ago are now fighting hate speech. In free societies, the right to free expression must include the right to offend. The President's Christmas speech does not require freedom of expression. It is those expressions that offend, shock, and disturb that are protected by the European Court of Human Rights. PAX Europa recommends that the word hate and hatred be abandoned by all official OSCE organs and in all OSCE publications. BPE, PAX Europa recommends that a clear, just definition of the term hate speech be provided by ODIHR and participating states, as this would improve general acceptance of the concept. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the Center for Research and Protection of Fundamental Rights, to then be followed by the Legal Information Center for Human Rights.
Thank you very much, Moderator. I represent the Center for Research and Protection of Fundamental Rights, and I would like to make two recommendations, or to pull out two recommendations from the documentation that we have submitted to the Secretariat. First of all, laws on how to deal with people who express hatred against others are not really harmonized. They're not uniform. When the name of someone who supposedly was expressing hatred against others were published, this resulted in threats against that individual from other members of Lithuanian society. and there was an appeal to the police to investigate the case against this individual. People were told that this individual was not really being investigated for hate crimes. I mean, it's not worth commenting on that. So I would recommend to the official authorities of Lithuania that there be a publication of this list of 5,000 individuals whose entry into Lithuania is prohibited. The historian Gozman, who was to come because he had individual contacts in Lithuania, and there is no possible appeal against this. I mean, this makes a cultural exchange difficult. It is an obstacle to the free circulation of individuals. And when someone is put on such a list, there should be an appeal possible, and it shouldn't be simply decided by the forces of law and order without judicial review.
To be followed by ABTTF, the Federation of Western and Thrace Turks in Europe.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm Larisa Semyonova from the Information Center for Human Rights. In Estonia, most Estonians are positive about the granting of Estonian citizenship to other people and the coexistence of people in the country. However, there are a few of them at high political level. We do note, however, clear linguistic divides. The number of those participating in political office is lower for minorities than Estonians. And there are lower numbers of people with higher education, so their access to highly paid work is reduced. And a knowledge of Estonian language is important, so they're not on an equal footing there. In order to equal opportunities, in 2008 there was a reform of the system for school education, and all Russian educational institutions from 2013 onwards were provided with Estonian teaching. At the beginning of this year, the Ministry of Education and Sciences of Estonia responded to a question that's saying that there are no longer municipal and state Russian schools in Estonia because they all have mixed teaching. We note some improvements in the knowledge of the Estonian language and there's also an increase in people's success. We would propose that from a situation where 60% of subjects are taught in Russian language in schools is something which we need to move on from. Last year, we reached out to a number of schools to ensure that people could enjoy the constitutional rights to teaching in their own language. And our full text is available on the website of this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to ABTTF, Federation of Western and Thrace Turks in Europe, to be followed by Center for Security Policy.
Thank you, Moderator. Melek Kırmacı Arık, ABTTF. Hate crimes remain a daily reality across the EU region, including Greece. And this issue has also extensively been discussed during UPR review of Greece in May 2016. And we note with very concern that the Turkish minority of Western Thrace has been a target of hate-motivated attacks in recent years. And also the US mission to the UN in Geneva raised its concern about the increasing instances of discrimination against the Turkish minority, which are also mentioned in the US International Religious Freedom Report for 2015. Hate speech and hate crimes are not isolated, and these incidents against the Turkish minority of Western Thrace are not isolated incidents, as Greece defined them. And hate speech is dominating the political sphere, both at the Greek parliament and also even in the EP. Let me give an example. Our NGO has organized an event in March 2016 on the freedom of association in the EP in Brussels, and which is hosted by an MEP Csaba Csogor, with the participation of the Greek Helsinki Monitor and the Macedonians in Greece. Two Golden Dawn MEPs came to the meeting room and verbally attacked the host MEP while shouting, there is no minority other than the Muslim minority in Thrace. Also, a last incident took place in the Greek parliament. Two Golden Dawn MEPs accused the minority MEP from Syriza as a Turkish agent and pro-Turk, and thankfully the vice president of the Greek parliament ordered the Golden Dawn MEPs to leave the room. We request from the Greek government to take result-oriented measures for eliminating discrimination and hate speech against the minority and improve diversity throughout the system that are inclusive of minorities as a part of all governmental policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the Center for Security Policy, to be followed by Pax Europa Austria.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Claire Lopez, the Vice President for Research and Analysis at the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C. With reference to this conference's annotated agenda, it's noted there that efforts to prevent bias-motivated violence and discrimination will be ineffective if they are not based on a sound understanding of what motivates perpetrators. I would like to express my wholehearted support for this observation. Specifically today, I would like to take the example of Jewish populations in Europe, particularly France, which are the target of resurgent and savage waves of anti-Semitism. According to published statistics, most of it perpetrated, unfortunately, by Muslims either already living in Europe or among waves of newly arrived migrants. No, this is not Auschwitz or Treblinka. There aren't that many Jews left in Europe these days. But France's Jews are fleeing the country in the largest numbers since World War II. And if we ask ourselves, where does such hatred come from? We must look, if we are honest, to scriptural writing from the Islamic canon. Why the Islamic canon, you ask? Because to the accompaniment of the jihad cry, Allahu Akbar, the following examples are among the citations flung at Jews and other non-Muslims under attack today, as it has been for nearly 1,400 years. For example, Surah 551 in the Quran, O you who believe, take not the Jews and Christians for your friends and protectors. Then Surah 855, where it says, the worst of beasts in the sight of Allah are those who reject him, they will not believe. And then, of course, multiple Quranic references to Jews as descendants of apes and pigs must stand out as repugnant to all of us who seek to end intolerant speech towards Jews and any people. Finally, hadiths such as the one from Sahih Bukhari, which states the day of judgment will not come until Muslims fight the Jews, and the Jews will hide behind the trees and rocks, which will cry out, O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him. I am sure you will join me in condemning all such language against Jews and everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I would remind speakers of OSCE commitments on tolerance and non-discrimination. I turn now to Pax Europa Austria, to be followed by Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm Henrik Clausen, representing BPE Austria. As other speakers have noticed, and the agenda says, it's very important to focus on the identity and motivations of the perpetrators. This will help cutting the hate crimes at its course. We have seen in many instances that Sharia, so-called Sharia zones are a source for hate crimes. Like in Copenhagen, Muslims invade bars and declare prohibition of selling alcohol because this is a Muslim zone. So, such attacks constitute hate crimes against non-Muslims and should be categorized as such. This also constitutes an attack on the law in our land, that they're trying to replace our law with Sharia law. And this is an affront to human rights and democracy. BP Austria recommends that OSCE participating states record what inspires hate crimes and rationally analyze the motivation and aims in order to deal directly with the ideas behind them. We recommend that the participating states protect Jewish communities in particular, as Jews suffer a disproportionate amount of hate crimes, and that OSCE defines violent enforcement of Sharia as a hate crime against non-Muslims. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
I turn now to the Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association, to be followed by Salut et Mikordi, and I apologize for my pronunciation.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm Onur Mustafa Ahmet from Western Thrace Minority University Graduate Association in Greece. In Western Thrace, the hate-motivated crimes and attacks targeting the Turkish minority, who is the oldest Muslim community in Europe, have increased parallel to increasing extreme nationalist movements across Europe and the Balkans in recent years. I would like to give you some examples. On 7th March 2015, in Didymotiko, a town inhabited with a significant proportion of Turkish minority members, ultra-nationalist, racist people disturbed by the work of the Didymotiko Muslim Sport, Culture and Education Association and broke the association's doors and windows. Perpetrators not found. On 8th December 2015, the only political party of the minority, the Friendship, Equality and Peace Party, suffered an attack. The windows of the headquarters of the party were broken, and the name of the organization of Guardians of Thrace was written on the walls. Perpetrators not found. On 28 January 2016, an official of the elected Mufti of Xanthi was beaten by the members of the organization of the Guardians of Thrace. Perpetrators not found. On 24th July 2016, the Turkish minority, with the leadership of Friendship, Equality and Peace Party, actualized a peaceful walk for human rights at the city center of Komotini with thousands of participants. The third largest Greek party, the Nazi Golden Dawn Party, with its members, tried to stop this peaceful walk by attacking two minority members. They had fight with Greek police officers, and fortunately, a bad event was prevented. The Council of Europe's Commissioner for Human Rights, Mr. Niels Muiznieks, also underlines the increasing hate crimes in Greece with his letter dated on 25th July 2016. Therefore, Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association calls upon the Greek state to take urgent measures to eliminate attacks in Turkish minority as well as other non-Greek ethnic origin inhabitants of Greece, and to arrest those who are responsible for the hate-motivated attacks and crimes against the Turkish minority and its foundations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I turn now to Salut et Miséricorde. Again, apologies for my pronunciation, to be followed by the Anti-Defamation League. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. My name is Father Guibages, and I will start by reminding you of the need to distinguish between a Muslim and Islam. In parallel with the growth of refugees in Europe, we have seen an increase in lack of civility crimes and attacks that are perpetrated in the name of Islam. Monsignor Nona, the Archbishop of Mosul, after the United States and their allies went into Iraq and the Middle East to sow chaos in the name of human rights, of course. But the Archbishop of Mosul warned us, but in vain. We think that all human beings are equal, but Islam does not say that all human beings are equal. And the Islamic State quite recently reminded Pope Francis, and through him all Westerners who wanted to see Islam to be a religion of peace, they reminded them, and I quote, until such time as you embrace Islam, we will continue to hate you. Allah demands of all Muslims that they spill the blood of the disbelievers wherever they are to be found. And in fact, the Quran proclaims, between you and us, there is nothing but hatred until you believe solely in Allah. Now, refugees, of course, would prefer to remain in their homes. And the real charity would not be to integrate them, but to make it possible for them to remain in their own homes. But are human rights at the service of human beings, or rather the bankers who need manpower, or countries full of unemployed? Rather than spending fortunes to integrate people who will never integrate because their religion prohibits it, and in fact Erdogan has expressly prohibited of his compatriots immigrated in Germany to integrate. It would be better to spend this money on the definitive destruction of Daesh and its allies.
Anti-Defamation League, to be followed by B'nai B'rith International.
Thank you. My name is Stacy Burdett, and I represent the Anti-Defamation League, a Jewish civil rights NGO in the United States. ADL was founded in the belief that protecting Jewish rights advances the cause of protecting the rights of all targets of discrimination. And my recommendations, which I hope you'll read in full, along with all the other NGO written statements, my recommendations will advance the security and dignity of all targets of hate crimes. I go into some specifics in the written statement that I hope you'll read, including a scorecard that actually grades how each one of the participating states at this table are doing in meeting their commitments to monitor and address hate crimes. So I hope you'll take a look to see where your country is ranked. And yes, we're very concerned about the anti-Semitism and bigotry that's been burning up Twitter, even in my own country during the election campaign. And I will focus on just 3 recommendations. 1, define the problem. You simply can't address a problem without understanding it. Though it's not legally binding, the definition adopted by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance is a very sound common reference point. Participating states and the OSCE and ODIHR should use it. The second, monitor and spotlight the problem. Participating states simply have to do better in submitting information and monitoring the problem. Half of the states around this table reported no information or 0 hate crimes. Take that in. 21 delegations submitted not even a 0. It's simply not acceptable. We cannot craft policy to protect people if our governments don't have eyes on the problem. And governments have a basic responsibility to protect Jewish communities and other targets of hate crimes, especially with terrorist and transnational violent extremist groups targeting and inciting against Jews. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I turn now to B'nai B'rith International, to be followed by the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm Eric Fussfield of B'nai B'rith International in Washington. The OSCE must strongly reinforce the crucial principle declared at the 2000 Berlin Conference on Anti-Semitism, that no political position, cause, or grievance can ever justify anti-Semitism, and make clear that the demonization and delegitimization of the Jewish state is often none other than a pretext for the hatred of Jews themselves. The past 2 years have seen a wave of anti-Israel demonstrations throughout the OSCE region. These gatherings have typically featured blatantly anti-Semitic themes and have often turned violent. As a result of anti-Semitic attacks, nearly 10,000 Jews emigrated from Western Europe to Israel last year, the highest ever number from that region. Furthermore, a recent survey of European Jewish leaders that membership and participation in Jewish institutions has declined, at the same time that security has, of necessity, been increased. This Sunday night, the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, will begin. Across this continent, synagogue attendance is expected to suffer as a result of fear about openly practicing Judaism. The rise of anti-Jewish hatred has also resulted in a proliferation of anti-Semitic propaganda, much of which is directed against the state of Israel. Tragically, this has become a daily occurrence as Israel's enemies repeatedly accuse it of being a Nazi-like occupier and a state that disenfranchises the Palestinians. Falsehoods about Israel are repeated so often they become widely accepted in the popular culture and sometimes impact government policy. This spring, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance adopted a working definition of anti-Semitism that clearly illustrates the dimension of the problem. The time has come for the OSCE to follow suit. The Hamburg Ministerial Council in December should approve a working definition of anti-Semitism based on the IRA model, the one that should be widely promoted within the OSCE to educate public officials, journalists, teachers, and others about the contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism. We commend the German chairmanship for their support of this initiative, as well as their backing of ODIHR's crucial anti-Semitism project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Microphone, please. I turn now to the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, to be followed by the delegation of the Russian Federation.
Thank you very much. Honor to be here to be able to speak with you. The Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy is an academic research center. We do academic programming at universities such as McGill, Harvard, Columbia, La Sapienza in Rome, and Oxford University, as well as others. And I'd like to say today that international relations are increasing the flux and turmoil as our notions of tolerance, democratic principles, and ideals of human rights and robust citizenship. These values appear to be receding within many institutions and society, while the international community seems to be less strident in trying to defend them. Scholars and experts have a deep understanding of contemporary anti-Semitism as well as its historical legacy. Know that anti-Semitism may begin with Jews, but it never, ever, ever ends with Jews. Once this virulent form of hatred is unleashed upon society, all of society will suffer, affecting its very core. In World War II, 6 million Jews were murdered, but we know that more than 80 million Europeans were eventually murdered, as no real opposition to Nazi ideology was effective until it was too late. It would appear that the Jew, or perhaps more importantly, the image of the Jew, is at the center of this global moment. Both historically and today, anti-Semitism is a social disease that begins with the Jews but does not end with them, making the Jewish people the proverbial canary in the coal mine. This deadly strain of hatred often turns into other groups, such as women, gay people, moderate Muslims, and other sectors of the population who are perceived as not being ideologically pure, as well as against key democratic notions such as citizenship and equality under one legal system. Today, Jewish peoplehood has been demonized for decades, and reactionary social movements use this hatred to fuel its rise to power, like the puppeteer, focusing on Israel, the Jew, the Zionists. We see reactionary social movements taking over institutions and even societies, attacking all that stand in its way. This document is available for distribution on your website. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the delegation of the Russian Federation, to be followed by the International Association of Islamic Business.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, in recent years, we have seen a drastic increase in the number of people holding radical right-wing views right around the world. And as a particular consequence, we are witnessing more cases of violence, of persecution of citizens on ethnic and religious grounds. In this connection, the Russian delegation feels it has to express its concern about the danger of extremist ideology spreading in many countries. For instance, in Great Britain, there has been a surge since the Brexit referendum in manifestations of racism and of xenophobia. There are reported cases of denigration and attacks by British citizens against representatives of national minorities and citizens of other EU member states who came to the British Isles in search of employment. In Sweden, about 70% of crimes are grounded in xenophobia and racism. A majority of threats originate from right-wing extremists, and yet the perpetrators of such criminal offenses are subject to real sanctions in only 3 to 5% of cases. One is, of course, particularly concerned by the spreading of nationalist and neo-Nazi ideas. During the morning session, we already mentioned the problem of Nazi and neo-Nazi ideology in the Baltic states. There can be no justification for the annual marches of veterans of the Waffen-SS, labeled a criminal organization by a sentence of the Nuremberg Tribunal. We call on the authorities of the Baltic countries and other OSCE participating states strongly to condemn such Nazi assemblies, and this is particularly important in the 70th anniversary of the Nuremberg Tribunal sentence. the USA, over the recent years, there have been a series of serious crimes on nationalist grounds. In June of 2015, the mass killing in the Emmanuel Episcopal Church in Charleston. In June of 2014, neo-Nazis shot 2 policemen in Las Vegas. An innocent bystander was killed. In November of this year, the neo-Nazis Larry McWilliams shot 100 times at government buildings in Austin. In last year, there were race protests in the University of Missouri, in Chicago, in connection with the killing by white police officers of a 7-year-old African American. There were also protests. Islamophobia is also on the rise. Now, cases of discrimination of citizens on ethnic grounds have also grown in the Netherlands, where in recent years unemployment of immigrants is rising, and there are clear cases also in Poland, and I think that it is important that countries of the EU also take into consideration the primacy of these principles. We must apply them.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the International Association of Islamic Business, to be followed by the Values Foundation.
Madam Moderator, dear friends, I'm Arat Karbayev, and I represent the Russian Muslim community, and I chair the International Association of Islamic Business. Being Muslims, we believe ourselves to be full participants in the economic and social life of our country, and an indivisible part thereof. Unfortunately, the format of our event does not give us an opportunity to fully share with you all aspects of our organization's work. So I would like to tell you about the main point, about peace and tolerance between people. Today, we're seeing ever harsher discussions, blame from both sides, an endless search for a response to the question, who is guilty? And the response, in fact, is very simple. We all are. There is no need to invent something new. Everything has already long been thought up for us. The prophets Muhammad, Moses, and Jesus Christ tried to tell those around them about one simple truth, about the need to live in love and harmony with one another. Since we are all as equal as teeth on a comb, today's development and technology, particularly in transport and means of communication, have given us a great gift, unlimited capacity to communicate and get to know the world around us. We Muslims believe that the differences between people are ordained by are sources of richness and harmony for all humanity. When we're talking about Russia, I'd like to give you the example of Kazan, the capital of Tatarstan, an area which has unique history and culture, and people live in closely together in symbiosis. There are 2 big world religions there, Islam and Christianity. Tatars, Russians, Chuvash, Bakshish, and Mordivi people, represented as many nationalities, live together in peace and harmony. And I would like to invite you to visit us at home so that you can see and take up on our valuable experience. In conclusion, I would like to speak to you with the words of the Almighty. O children of Adam, we created man and woman and created the people and tribes so that you could get to know each other. You know the most noble of you before the Creator is that who is honest. Truly, the Almighty is all-knowing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the Values Foundation, to be followed by East European Security Research Initiative Foundation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is David Skinner from the Values Foundation, and I'd like to make a specific statement followed by a recommendation on the growing intolerance towards religious or faith private schools that are being by genuine religious minorities. We fully appreciate the dilemma of European governments and how to cope with social segregation and extremism in their schools, especially as they face increasing levels of refugee and migrant children from other countries coming in. But this should not mean that religious schools should no longer be allowed to operate. There's much positive work being done. In Manchester, the UK, the Jewish high school has twinned with the Manchester Islamic School. 500 students who decide for themselves they will counter their prejudices, seek to understand each other's cultures and way of life. And then there's the countless Christian schools throughout Europe giving consistently good academic results, contributing positively to their national education. Yet in some countries we see a growing intolerance towards such schools. In Canada, the education minister writes to the Baptist School Council demanding a written promise that their schools will allow gay associations being formed or else they'll withdraw funding. In Sweden, a school minister recently talked of banning religious private schools because she hears they divide boys and girls during physical education and swimming lessons. We recommend to the governments represented here that they fully respect and uphold in their legislation the right of religious private schools to exist. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the East European Security Research Initiative Foundation, to be followed by the European Network Apart from Racism.
Thank you. Maxim Khalko, East European Security Research Initiative Foundation based in Kyiv. The time of military conflict is a challenging time for the issues of non-discrimination and tolerance. And in this regard, it is worth noting that the OSCE, Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, and the project coordination in Ukraine, together with Ukrainian civil society actors and public authorities, are doing a considerable work to implement commitments on preventing and countering discrimination and intolerance. Of special importance are the following implementing projects: strengthen dialogue among civil society and government stakeholders on human dimension issues, promoting security for religious commitments, supporting conflict centers in journalism, and some others. It is worth noting also that this month, following the consultative opinion provided by the OSCE project coordinator in Ukraine, a Ukrainian Constitutional Court abolished regulations limiting the religious assemblies. And so from this time, people who want to hold some religious gathering or assemblies do not need prior permission from the authorities anymore. Some important changes have been done also to our judicial system, and one can learn more about this on the special side event on September to be held here. But surely still many things are to be improved, and especially it is about the improvement of identification and recording of hate crimes, which is a common problem of the all post-Soviet countries. And surely of special concern for Ukraine is the situation in the annexed Crimea and occupied regions of Donbass, which are de facto occupied, and where the intolerance and discrimination towards the Crimean Tatar and Ukrainian-speaking communities have become a part of the everyday life, and where the international monitoring on human rights situation is urgently needed. My full statement with the recommendations provided from our organization will be available on the OSCE website. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the European Network Against Racism, to be followed by the European Forum of Muslim Women.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, NGOs such as Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and the Collective Against Islamophobia in France documented the impact of the state of emergency in France and the violence of the house raids. Those raids targeted mostly Muslim households, workplaces, and mosques. However, until today, after nearly 3,500 house raids, there is only 6 investigations for terrorism, thus a rate of failure of 99.8%. The discriminatory policies were mainly implemented to showcase state and police actions after a notable failure of the National Security Agency. This mindset is highly dangerous because first, almost every terrorist since January 2015 were already known by the intelligence agency and monitored by them. This willingness to monitor people based on their religious beliefs or suspicious and not supported by facts and investigation show its limits and leads to abuse. Legislative fever. Between January 2015 and today, we observe that multiple laws have been adopted to combat terrorism, both at the national and the European level. The fast tracking, along with the lack of consultation and involvement of minority and the civil society, are highly concerning. Example of counter-terrorism policy in the UK with the PREVENT program, or here in Poland, shows there is a trade-off between perceived security and freedom, and too often, minorities are demanded to pay the price of this so-called security. Finally, this way of only seeing minority through the lens of security could be very counterproductive in the long term, as it further stigmatize them, therefore validating the narrative of of extreme violent group, including far rights. Therefore, the European Network Against Racism called for an impact assessment of the almost 1-year-long state of emergency in France on minorities, and particularly on Muslims and migrants. And an impact assessment should be included in a counter-terrorism directive discussed at the moment at the European level. We ask the member states to recognize Islamophobia as a specific form of racism and therefore implement national strategies to combat it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to remind delegations interested in exercising their right of reply to sign up behind me, my colleagues. I turn now to the European Forum of Muslim Women, to be followed by the Department for External Church Relations of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church.
Thank you, moderator. I speak on behalf of the European Forum of Muslim Women. We're a pan-European organization that fights for human rights and equality for all Muslim women. Europe has been witness to a sharp increase in Islamophobic political discourse, especially political rhetoric that specifically targets Muslim women. This has become a tolerated and institutionalized violation of women's human rights. These public discourses, now carried by mainstream politicians, have been framing Muslim women and their religious belief as antagonistic to European values. These discourses have been marginalizing them in the public opinion and have constructed a flawed image of these women, playing a key part in fostering discrimination, intolerance, and hate speech, and crimes against Muslim women, which should be acknowledged as gender-based violence, as well as a threat to achieving gender equality. This has a direct impact on the daily lives of Muslim women in areas of dress code, access to employment, and higher studies, and leads to internalized discrimination. France can be viewed as a prime example of a drifting state when it comes to the fundamental rights of all of its citizens, especially Muslim women. These women have relentless harassment by policymakers and politicians at large when it comes to discourses. The list of Islamophobic and discriminatory comments is extensive for French politicians, including but not limited to Prime Minister Manuel Valls, former President Nicolas Sarkozy, or even the Minister for Women's Rights, Florence Rossignol. The latter compared Muslim women who chose to wear the headscarf to, quote, Negroes that chose slavery, dehumanizing and stripping these women from their agency to choose from themselves. We hence urge all the present country delegations to acknowledge institutionalized discriminations and to hold such countries accountable to their commitments to fundamental rights. We urge country delegations to adopt a code of conduct for political representatives, framing public discourse. We urge all states to protect the rights of women, including Muslim women, in their freedom of expression, of thought, and of religion, and also to engage Muslim women as a part of the solution. Finally, we acknowledge that this issue requires intersectional response and are looking forward to all civil society actors in achieving equality for all women, including Muslim women, regardless of their background. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the Department for External Church Relations of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, to be followed by NGO Public Advocacy.
Спасибо.
Thank you. I'll be speaking in Russian. I represent the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the largest religious organization in Ukraine as a country. Unfortunately, over the last 2 years, our church has been subject to discrimination, and that is a fact that has been accepted at the international level. The U.S. State Department, in particular, has published a report on religious freedom in the world in 2015, and there's detailed mention of that discrimination. Since that time, the situation has not changed. Already, some 40 of us have been taken away from us by force. In September, on the 14th of September, the Chernobyl Oblast, a building where our community prayed has been destroyed, and the Pravi sector in the western part of Ukraine has exerted pressure on our believers, and I'm thinking of a Law 4128. If you look at the full text of my speech, you will see why this draft law is discriminatory, and in fact it's discriminatory vis-a-vis other faiths in our country as well. Now, all of these facts that we talk about and will continue to talk about, we wouldn't want that to be turned into political propaganda, but we're referring to this for the solution of these problems is crucial. We want to have a positive dialogue with our national authorities to resolve these difficulties. So we would call upon the OSCE to convince the authorities of our country not to discriminate, to make sure that hate speech does not win the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Turn now to NGO Public Advocacy, to be followed by the Interreligious Council of Russia.
Меня зовут Олег Денисов, НПО «Общественная правозащита».
My name is Denisov. I'm with NGO Public Advocacy. Following up on what was said about discrimination of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, I'd like to say that this has become systematic. In 2015, we already mentioned such violations in 2015. Now, in 2016, the violations have continued. We've drawn up a complete report on such manifestations that's available to all participants. And these violations are really rooted in hate speech, and hate speech in particular on the internet. Unfortunately, this is also fomented by certain civil servants and believers from other religious groups. The attacks against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church fall into different groups, including taking over churches, the St. Catherine Church, for instance, that was done in a violent, forceful manner by the police. 15 of our believers were wounded on that occasion, most of them women and elderly. Now, unfortunately, the situation is getting worse. We have registered ownership of certain churches, and yet the authorities are simply through decisions of the church are taking them over, and we are appealing this to the European Court of Human Rights because all domestic recourse has been exhausted. There continues to be that problem in the Chernobyl Oblast. One of our monasteries there is being labeled anti-Ukrainian, and that simply isn't justified. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the Interreligious Council of Russia, to be followed by Unconstrained Analytics, Inc.
Спасибо.
Thank you. And good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Sergei Mininik. I represent the organization, the Interreligious Council of Russia. This council brings together the heads of traditional religions of the Russian Federation, the Orthodox Church, Islam, and Buddhism. My Interreligious Council rejects the dramatic side of religion and developing a strategy on social problems and working in an area in the common interest, as the practice has shown. Due to the closeness of our moral principles, and our answers to social problems are much easier. For example, participants came forward with a joint statement on the protection of the unborn, which actually the protection of children and traditional family values has been dealt with more than once at our council. An example of this, the work of traditional religious in protecting interests, could be the introduction of theology onto the list of scientific disciplines in the Ministry of Sciences of the Russian Federation. Members of the Religious Council of Russia have a joint communication which they sent to the President of Russia in October 2015. Theology was recognized as a scientific specialism. We believe that this event is very important from the point of view of counteracting xenophobia and religious intolerance. What we need to do is not attack religion, but intolerance and a lack of respect for religious issues. We are working to strengthen peace and security in our community. The experience of Russia is an example of how religious relations in our country can be constructed in a constructive spirit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. to Unconstrained Analytics, Inc., to be followed by Russian Islamic University.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, ladies and gentlemen. Extreme right wing, hate speech, hate crime, hater are terms that are getting thrown around freely in forums like this. Of course, when one hears these words, what comes to mind are Nazis, skinheads, the Ku Klux Klan, and virulent anti-Semites, etc., and hence we can agree with the concerns. As these terms tend to be used, however, they are more often directed at citizens who simply dissent from prevailing narratives that seek to brand them as haters or for being extreme right-wing for the purpose of forcing them into a stereotype in furtherance of criminalizing them through their speech if they don't conform. It is used to intimidate law-abiding citizens. This has become the true language of stereotyping, stigmatization, and discrimination, directed at citizens whose only fault is that they voice dissent from the Orwellian narrative that imposes 2 + 2 = 5 as the price for being permitted the right to have a voice in a public forum. As many in this forum seek to criminalize haters, thus putting the power of the state behind enforcing free expression, it makes a mockery of the very idea of free speech and of a free citizenry. Now we see the new term emerging, message crime. For example, at a side event at the 2013 OSCE meetings here in Warsaw, we got principals to admit that Islamophobia has no core definition at the same time that other OSCE forums were, and still are, advocating criminalizing Islamophobia. Among the most common responses then, as now, is that we all know what it is. When something means anything you want, it usually means nothing at all. When a term that lacks a reasonably articulable definition is used to criminalize a class of citizens, it gives the state the power to intimidate citizens for any reason or no reason at all. Unconstrained Analytics recommends that the OSCE and all participating states rethink the narratives they are so casually putting in motion on the assumption that we all know what it means when it appears to mean it is the suppression of dissent through intimidation under color of authority. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the Russian Islamic University, to be followed by the Civic Chamber of the Russian Federation. I would also like to make an announcement to participating states who have not yet signed up for the right of reply. Please do come let us know. We ask that you sign up now. We ask that to let us know if you will speak in a language other than English. Apparently we have a very large number of delegations who wish to exercise their right of reply, and so we would also ask that you restrain to 1 minute your right of reply. I turn back now to the Russian Islamic University.
Madam Moderator, dear participants, the problem of tolerance, uprooting discrimination is a very topical issue, of course, for civil society organizations. The present situation in the European area is that we need to look at this in new, profound ways. The demographic situation, the pluralism, the immigration, all of this is resulting in new challenges. There's homophobia, there's radicalization of some Muslims. There are difficulties on the employment market, for the job market for second and third generation immigrants. And all of these is occurring in this Europe, which has been forming its democratic values in its civil society over centuries. So it seems to me that we need now, in an in-depth way, to study positive experience, best practices. Now, our Russian experience in interreligious relations is unique. And the Islamic education, which is integrated into the Russian education system, at our Islamic university, graduate BAs and MAs with values that are consistent for both the Russian society and the Islamic religion, and are consistent with the values upheld by the society as a whole. So this can be a very positive example, an exemplar indeed, for CIS countries, but Western European countries. We are also very active in working with migrants and integrating them in Russian society. In closing, I would like to say that the positive experience of the Russian Federation and many other countries is very important because the time has come to uproot these problems in a positive sense.
To the Civic Chamber of the Russian Federation, to be followed by Think Out.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm the Mufti Albert Ahafnanov, and I work in the working group on counteracting religious extremism of the Civic Chamber of the Russian Federation. I would today like to call for a strengthening of the law on believers, given recent laws adopted in Russia over recent years. I want to talk about the law on outraging the sensibilities of believers. And there's the so-called law, the Yarovoy law, about changes to this law. And with regard to this, I'd like to say the following. In our commission, the Civic Chamber, and we monitor the application of the law, and incidents have not been recorded with people being prosecuted under this law. Traditional legislation generally proposes amendments and changes to it, and in the event of violations of the rights of believers, we would change this law. According to our communications, I'll give you an example. When the topic of politicization of religious educational institutions and mosques, we made amendments with regard to religious teaching. So this was not considered to be education anymore. I would like to talk about a person with authority cannot represent their entire people on an international stage if they're a religious authority. We also have legislative basis protecting the rights of various peoples in this way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We move now to Think Out, to be followed by Network Muslimisha Civilgeja. Thank you.
Sevim Korkut, Think Out France.
I represent Think Out France. After the attacks of 13 November last, François Hollande spoke before the Houses of Parliament in Versailles that France was at war. He talked about terrorism being combated pitilessly. The president also assured us all that terrorism will not destroy the Republic because it is the Republic that will destroy terrorism. Well, dear participants, it is not terrorism that was destroyed. It's national unity. It's not radicalism, but rather the Republic that was destroyed. When concern its apogee, the rule of law is being completely ignored. And I have difficulty understanding this. I mean, how can we accept the fact that some French mayors are not following the order of the Council of State, handed down in the name of the French people, concluding that anti-Burkini orders are a significant undermining of fundamental freedoms. Let me remind you that the mayor of Cisco, Angre-Pierre Vivoni, affirmed that he was not affected by this decision of the Council of State. I mean, this is a mayor elected by the French people stating that a judicial decision handed down in the name of the French people does not affect him. So there is no rule of law. It is not France that was pitiless with terrorism, but French politics that is in a pitiful situation. In his speech, the President of the Republic also specified that the war of France is a war against a different type of adversary. So previously, we saw terrorists being prosecuted before the courts, but now it is women swimming on the French coast who are being prosecuted. Imagine. So reducing France to political ineptitude of our leaders would be a serious error. No, we have our values in France. To abandon the combat would be to abandon France, to betray its values, to play the game, to play into the hands of the extremists and all those who are playing on the fear of the French people. But France is not going to interfere into the affairs of other countries, but diplomatic relations with France are very important for us.
Netzwerk, and again, apologies for my pronunciation, to be followed by Emisko.
My name is Gözde Taşkaya, and I am here as a representative for Netzwerk Muslimische Zivilgesellschaft, which is and was founded in the course of the resistance against the Austrian Islam Law 2014. In Austria, Islamophobia is getting more and more visible day by day. We have experienced a steep increase in the number of hate crimes against Muslims. They have always been assaults on Muslims, but it has never really been acknowledged by the society. There are no real consequences on hate crimes, hate speeches, or hate on the internet too. Furthermore, many police officers are not trained sufficiently on the matter. On that account, our network decided to do empowerment work in order to help victims, especially women. There has been a great demand for the self-defense course we have offered. We also spotted the need for verbal self-defense training. Our experience with that shows us that many Muslim women become a target of hate in times of populism and anti-Muslim sentiment. In a cooperation with some filmmakers, our network released a documentation movie called Islamophobia with Austrian imprint. Our personnel was also involved in the media team, and I can give you an example of a young Muslim hijabi who was verbally attacked by someone, also spit on her face, obviously because she was Muslim. She recorded it with a mobile phone, but the police claimed that the video was not useful for them. She put the video on the internet, and someone sent her the name of the person who attacked her. She went to the police again, and due to her persistent demand, the police officer reported it finally, yet not as an anti-Muslim hate crime, but as a noise disturbance incident. Our recommendations are: the first step in addressing and preventing non-tolerance and discrimination is to acknowledge the severity of the problem, the rise of Islamophobia, and the rise of anti-Muslim hate crimes in the prospective countries. We are definitely in need of governmental anti-discrimination institutions supported by the ODIHR and the collecting of official data by those anti-discrimination institutions. Okay, thank you.
I suggest submitting your full statement for circulation. Thank you. I turn now to Emisko, and then to our final intervention, which will be the Spiritual Directorate of the Muslims of Crimea.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Bashir Qureshi. I am Secretary General of Emisko, European Muslim Initiative for Social Cohesion. Let me first thank both Rabbi Baker and Professor Shenai for highlighting the disturbing increase in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in OSCE countries. My organization had worked very hard to create specific recommendation today, but we have provided that to ODIHR, so I shall limit my 2 minutes to deal with a growing Islamophobic trend in OSCE sessions. Listening to PAX Europa and other anti-Islam organizations, participants must have heard that anti-Islam propaganda and anti-Islam rhetoric and lies have now reached this noble platform. Madam Moderator, such shameless rants against world's second largest religion must not be accepted, must not be accepted and let loose at this forum. This is not freedom of expression or freedom of speech. We all agree that people can say what they like, but freedom to demonize and have efforts to spread hatred against 1.7 billion Muslims should not be accepted in OSCE sessions. Professor Sinai was very right when he mentioned that many Muslims find themselves under siege. Listening to the wording of such anti-Islam formulations today, I am reminded of tactics and terminology used by Nazis during the Second World War. And believe me, my Jewish brother and sisters and nephews in this session should also please remember that what happened that time should never, never happen today with Muslims. We are your partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the Spiritual Directorate of the Muslims of Crimea.
The colleague from Austria said something with regard to Sharia. say that Sharia is not a source of violence. A lack of awareness of religion are the source of violence, Islamophobia in particular. With regard to prisoners in Crimea, I'll say that those people who are mentioned in the Hizb ut-Tahrir trial, Mr. Chubarov spoke of it before the lunch, sir, that this is not because of religious actions, but the work of an extremist party these people were involved with. There's another case with regard to punishment for human rights violations. We've already heard that terrorism and extremism need to be clearly defined, and I think that that recommendation is something which should be taken into account in national legislation so that it can be corrected in line with this. I would like to say that the actions of Albert Khatirov in Crimea was promoting a prohibition to go and agitated against national language and traditions and so on. And this is a problem for the Crimean Tatar minority. But we've heard about this previously. As regards religious freedom, well, this year, 300,000 people went to religious places in Crimea, and people are free to believe what faith they will and go to religious organizations. Holidays have become official. We have no problems in this regard. I'd like to thank the OSCE chairmanship for giving us the opportunity to tell you about the situation directly.
We must now turn to the right of reply. I have on the list the first delegation will be the delegation of Ukraine, followed by delegation France.
Dear Madam Moderator and the Eurasian Director of the Department for Religious Affairs and Nationalities of Ukraine, I would like to answer for the statement of two representatives of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church under jurisdiction of Moscow Patriarchate. They mentioned that they are against using of their statement for their ideological propaganda, but these statements are obvious continuation of this propaganda. Among other speculative statements, the first speakers mentioned the annual report of the US State Department. To this document, as typical example, is a typical speculative facts for so-called hybrid war against the Ukraine. This report just quotes the statement of some representatives of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, as well as other opponents, declare absolutely opposite messages. Speakers mentioned the cases when some communities, totally around 150 in their entire country, changing their canonical subordination. The process is taking place in the close correlation with the Article 8 of the national law and a recommendation OSCE that any religious community have a right and possibility to change their subordination. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I remind delegations we only have a minute for the right of reply, and I apologize in advance for sticking to the time. We move to the delegation of France, followed by the delegation of Armenia.
Merci. Thank you very much. I shall be brief. First, decreed a state of emergency following a whole series of bloody terrorist attacks, which resulted in a few months in 2 deaths. The state of emergency was enacted by the Parliament following a democratic debate. All opinions can be expressed in the press, in the media. The state of emergency is applied under the judicial monitoring. Similarly, the municipal decrees and bylaws that have been mentioned, what defines law in France is not one municipal decision, it's not one declaration by a mayor, however much it can be criticized. It is a decision of the Council of State, which is our supreme administrative court, and it introduced a rationale in all of this. A second point, insofar as Muslim women is concerned, any discrimination on the basis of gender or on the basis of religion is prohibited in France. Muslim women are not particular targets of this. The law is the same for them as for any other woman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now move to the delegation of Armenia, to be followed by the delegation of Ireland.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Full statement will be distributed. We would like to encourage delegation of Azerbaijan to check more carefully statements of its gongos, as they manage even to distort Azerbaijani official statistics. There is no Armenian community in Azerbaijan, just like there is no any Armenian church, school, or community institution. Let's be clear, tolerance and non-discrimination is impossible in the framework of gross violation of human rights. Open encouragement of hate crimes is a state policy pursued in Azerbaijan by highest political leadership, including its president. Regrettably, year of multiculturalism in Azerbaijan started with barbaric atrocities of Armenian population. OD remained silent on all these cases and failed to apply its early warning mandate. Moreover, it opted to organize an event on tolerance in Baku, something which will only serve as encouragement of future hate crimes. We understand that this decision was a result of Azerbaijan's blackmailing and smear campaign targeting OSCE institutions. But when an OSCE institution claims that it is autonomous, it should act like that. Recommendation of ODIHR, its TND program should be completely reshuffled through terminating all tools and events which lack added value. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now to the delegation of Ireland, to be followed by a delegation of the United Kingdom.
The delegation of Ireland has listened to what Atheist Ireland had to say this afternoon, the substance of which will be conveyed to the relevant authorities in Ireland. Let me briefly refer to mention by Atheist Ireland to the possibility of prosecution for blasphemy in a court of law in Ireland. Historically, the last prosecution for blasphemy by public authorities in Ireland was in 1855, 161 years ago. The 2009 Defamation Act abolished the possibility of private prosecution for blasphemy. The definition of blasphemy is now more specific and more demanding. Imprisonment as a potential penalty has also been removed. The maximum possible sanction is a fine of €25,000. This is so because of the Article 46(6)(1) reference in the 37 Constitution of Ireland to blasphemous utterances. The Government of Ireland has decided to remove this reference from Ireland's Constitution by referendum of the people as in so informed Irish Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the delegation of the United Kingdom, to be followed by the delegation of Germany.
Thank you. I'd like to thank today's speakers and to acknowledge the comments of Mr. Collins, whose organisation has worked with the UK government to strengthen our approach to preventing and tackling hate crime. Hate crime is not acceptable, and through challenge, critical friends and strong, genuine civil society involvement, we and all participating states can strengthen their response. We look forward to receiving the report from Professor Shania and Rabbi Baker following their visit to the UK in July. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the delegation of Germany, to be followed by the delegation of the Czech Republic.
Ich wollte kurz Stellung nehmen zu dem Vorhalt, dass
Well, briefly, I would like to respond to the argument on according to which measures have been taken in Germany which give rise to a limitation of the freedom of expression. There were measures which were undertaken, which were part of a prosecution of an accusation of a group responsible for hate speech. Germany does have a particular responsibility as regards the protection of minorities. Since the creation of the Bundesrepublik, freedom of expression should not be hindered in Germany. We've found a balance between freedom of expression and rights of minorities. And our constitution does take this into account. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would like to thank the translators. I have been told to release the translators, so thank you very much for your service.
Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Delegation of the Czech Republic, to be the delegation of Estonia.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would like to reply to the statement of Religious Society Path Guru Jara. In the Czech Republic, the freedom of religious belief is subject only to such limitations as are prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society in the interest of public safety, for the protection of public order, health, or morals, or for the protection of rights and freedoms of the others. The persons mentioned in this statement were charged with offenses which are considered serious in every society, regardless of the religion of the perpetrator. Their case is before a court. Since 2015, these two persons have been kept in a detention facility in the Philippines for breaching the country's rules. All decisions concerning their detention are autonomous decisions made by the government of the Philippines. The Czech Republic has repeatedly offered consular help to both persons. This offer still stands. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We turn now to the delegation of Estonia, to be followed by the delegation of Turkey.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. This is a reply to the Legal Information Center, Russian School in Estonia, and Russian Federation. Education reform and transition to Estonian language education has not had any negative impact on the quality of education in Estonia, as many Russian language schools are among the best ranking schools in Estonia. According to PISA tests, the gap between the Estonian language and Russian language schools in Estonia has begun to decrease. Aim of the Estonian Internal Security Service annual report is to inform public about potential threats to the national security, and it can never be seen as an instrument to convict and stigmatize anyone. Every person whose rights and freedoms have been violated has a recourse to the court. Several people whose name has been published in the reports have effectively used that right. Estonian government has condemned all crimes against humanity implemented by totalitarian and authoritarian regimes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the delegation of Turkey, to be followed by the delegation of Greece.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. In his confused and mostly indecipherable statement, the representative of Salu and Miséricorde accused the Turkish government of urging Turks living abroad not to integrate. Nothing could be further from the truth. Actually, I took the floor not to reply to such nonsensical allegations, but rather to make a simple observation. None of the Muslim NGOs I listened to here today voiced a single hateful or intolerant remark. Instead, they voiced legitimate concerns in a constructive manner in keeping with the spirit of this meeting. And this, in my opinion, was in stark contrast to those NGOs which, while accusing Muslims of being intolerant, were themselves brimming over with intolerance and occasionally also crossed over the line into hate speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the delegation of Greece, to be followed by the delegation of Poland.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. In reply to the two NGOs, I would like to stress that in 2014 and 2015, Greek Parliament adopted laws to strengthen our criminal anti-racism legislation to facilitate its implementation and to introduce more severe penalties for racist crimes. Members of the political party Golden Dawn, including members of the Parliament, have been brought to trial, which is still ongoing. No society of phenomena of racism and discrimination, but when representatives of extreme political movements are disrespectful of democratic principles, then they are condemned and marginalized. The threats Muslim minorities' relation with the Christian majority in the area are in absolute harmony, and there are no crimes that could be designated as hate crimes or discrimination against Muslims by the local community. Two isolated incidents involving Muslim persons and property are individual cases that do not target the Muslim element as a whole, yet there are extended and thorough investigation by the police authorities to identify and punish the perpetrators. The full text will be shared online. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the delegation of Poland, to be followed by the delegation of Hungary.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Replying to some remarks on the situation in Poland, please let me inform you that, in fact, the Polish government introduced a new law that penalized the use of the defamatory phrase Polish death camps. However, this regulation nothing to do with silencing the critical voices. Therefore, the remark made by distinguished personal representative on combating anti-Semitism related to the situation in Poland is very surprising, especially in the context of his recent country visit to Poland. Calling Nazi death camps located in the territory of occupied Poland during the Second World War Polish death camps is not a critical voice. We recognize it as constituting a crime of hate speech directed against Poland and Polish people. We believe that reminding the world about the Holocaust is our obligation. That's why Poland requested the Auschwitz-Birkenau to be inscribed at the UNESCO World Heritage List. But Poland's effort to save the memory of the Holocaust for future generations should not be turned into false accusation against Poland. And as regards the comments made by distinguished US delegation, I would like to add that any friendly advice is always welcome, but I'm really intrigued by the phrase, the Polish law is wrong. Using it, it is not penalized, please don't worry. I just would be really happy to hear what this means in legal terms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the delegation of Hungary, to be followed by the delegation of Sweden.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'd like to comment to the intervention of Rabbi Baker and the distinguished delegation of the USA. The Hungarian government carrying out zero-tolerance policy toward anti-Semitism. This not only laid down in words but turned into actions. Since 2010, the government modified, among others, the criminal code and the House rules of the parliament to combat hate speech. Also, a consultative forum had been established to ensure regular exchange of views between the Jewish community and the government. Thanks to this, a kind of Jewish renaissance taking place in our country. Also would like to evoke that last year Hungary chaired the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which organization Rabbi Baker and several participants mentioned. At the first PC of this year, State Secretary Szabolcs Takács presented for the participating states the work had been done throughout the year in our capacity. On the decoration of Zsolt Bayer, I would like to add that a civil organization nominated him for the award because of his work carried out as a journalist to research victims of the Gulag. In connection with the lack of action by the government mentioned by Rabbi Baker, let me underline that according to the legal regulation, it is impossible to withdraw the decoration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the delegation of Sweden, to be followed by the delegation of the United States of America.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I take the floor to the statement by the Russian Federation regarding hate-motivated crimes in Sweden. We appreciate the concern expressed by the Russian Federation about this serious problem and would like to make the following comment. Crime statistics are produced differently in different countries. Such statistics are influenced both by legal and statistical factors and by the extent to which crime is reported and registered. Sweden has an extensive way of counting the number of crimes that make up the statistics, as well as registration of the motivation of crimes. Every single offense is, for example, recorded separately, and all reported crimes are counted as all reported events are counted as crimes, even if some of them are later found not to have constituted criminal offenses. This can be part of the explanation of the statistics brought forward by the Russian Federation. Of course, all hate-motivated crimes are unacceptable. The Swedish government takes hate-motivated crimes very seriously and is committed to addressing this problem. There are several initiatives to this end. We will convey the concerns expressed by the Russian Federation to the relevant authorities. On a slightly different note, one organization here made a statement about religious private schools in Sweden. This point will likewise be conveyed to Swedish authorities. Finally, I would like to thank Rabbi Baker and Professor Shingai for their visit to Sweden and their statements here today. We look forward to the full report from the visit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the delegation of the United States of America, to be followed by the delegation of Azerbaijan.
Thank you. First, we want to reassure our Polish colleagues that we agree with Poland that Polish death camps is a factually wrong phrase. Our was that it shouldn't be criminalized, not that it was a correct phrase. We also wanted to thank the Russian Federation for raising hate crimes and unjustified police killings in the United States. We don't agree with the characterization of those crimes as nationalist, but we noted those very same problems in our own statements, and we appreciate that and we're working to address them. This is why we consistently raise these issues, and we appreciate constructive feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the delegation of Azerbaijan, to be followed by the delegation of Romania.
My name is
from State Committee on Religious Associations. As a land of tolerance, we see all religious and historical monuments as part of our historical heritages. That's why today Armenian Church still stands not only undamaged in central Baku, but also renovated by Azerbaijani government, while almost mosques and other religious historical temples have been destroyed or desecrated in the occupied territories by Armenia. The latest evidence facted by the international fact-find missions, and in regarding with the multiculturalism that stated here, I will say that the model of Azerbaijan multiculturalism is taught over than 15 overseas universities around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the delegation of Romania, to be followed by the delegation of Austria, the last participating state delegation I have on my list for right of reply.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Since Rabbi Baker and several NGOs here present mentioned the results of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance plenary in Bucharest in May this year, we would like to recall that combating anti-Semitism has been an overarching principle that has guided the Romanian chairmanship. The working definition of anti-Semitism, adopted in May, sets an example of responsible conduct for other international fora and hopes to inspire them to consider adopting this definition as well. We commend the current chairmanship in office of the OSCE for the diligent efforts to conclude the adoption of a working definition based on the one adopted by IHRA at its Ministerial Council in Hamburg in December this year. We call on all OSCE participating states to consider with responsibility this important initiative and to acknowledge the critical need to ensure the most effective tools for combating any form of anti-Semitism. Our full state session is distributed online. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I turn now to the delegation of Austria, again, the last participating state that wishes to exercise its right of reply on my list.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would like to briefly react to the statement made earlier on. Islamophobe incidents in Austria, and I mean, we're fully aware of challenges in this field. At the same time, I would like to point out that Austria has a comprehensive legal framework for the protection against discrimination, racism, and religious intolerance in place. To give some examples, there are anti-discrimination offices that provide support to anybody who falls victim to incidents. At the same time, a hotline established in the Austrian Foreign Ministry, for example, provides legal support and advice to any victims of intolerance and discrimination. There's also a whole range of sensitization measures and programs in place in Austria, in particular training in schools, in the police, in justice, and in the private sector, in order to create awareness and provide protection against such incidents for the future. All measures and programs are under constant review and evaluation to meet the needs and challenges, and we would like to continue to work in this regard with all relevant stakeholders, including civil society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would like to thank very much our introducers and all of our speakers and everyone in the audience today for your participation in the session. I would like to remind you to please leave your headset, receiver, and headphone in the room. And obviously, there's a deep interest in these sessions. The speakers list opens 1 hour early before the session, so I would encourage all of you to come early and sign up. And with that, I would invite you to the side events this evening. Thank you very much.